Important update about YouTube playlists. Hey everyone. We've received many messages asking why our YouTube playlists aren't showing up. Do we create YouTube playlists? Yes, we absolutely do. So why can't you see them? Honestly, we're not sure. We've been in contact with YouTube support for several months now, but we still haven't received a clear answer or solution. After much discussion, our team has decided to take matters into our own hands. We believe the issue might be related to the number of playlists we've created on a single channel, possibly too many. Our solution? We're launching 2 additional YouTube channels, giving us a total of 3. This way, we can organize our audiobooks better and avoid the playlist visibility issue in the future. This change only affects our YouTube audience. If you're a patron supporter, you can still access all our audiobooks by visiting the collection menu on Patreon. Thanks so much for your time and continued support. Happy listening. Since director Olga Marie would also be heading to the front lines of the Singularity, Romani, like during Singularity F, had to stay in the control room and handle most of the support duties. Everything's normal. I am a magus, after all. I'm well aware of my own condition. Xiaomi nodded, giving a straightforward response. Romani scratched the back of his head with a hand holding his pen. That's good to hear. It's just your recovery ability is a bit too extreme. I still can't help but worry. What do you mean? Xiaomi asked. A human cells can only divide a limited number of times over a lifetime. Even magus aren't exempt. If your healing magic operates on the same principle, I'm concerned it might shorten your lifespan, Romani explained seriously. He had seen it with his own eyes. After the Singularity had been repaired, Xiaomi looked like he'd crawled out of a coffin like a zombie, kicking open the damaged spirit transfer coffin that couldn't be opened normally. When he emerged, Xiaomi wasn't just injured. His body was a bloody mess. Yet even though he should have been rushed to the ICU for a combined magic and scientific treatment, his body regenerated at an unbelievable speed. In terms of healing efficiency, he had already surpassed every form of magecraft in this era. Xiaomi paused for a moment, then gave a reluctant explanation. It's hard to explain, but regeneration magic is actually what I'm best at. Even my master says she can't match me in this field. Romani blinked in surprise. I see. It was clearly a different magical system. One Romani had no way of fully understanding. You're supposed to be one of the top magus, and you don't even understand this? Morgan, who had been talking with Xiaomi about the preparations for the Singularity before Romani's arrival interrupted them, finally spoke up. Well, I wouldn't go that far, Romani replied with an awkward smile. He'd wanted to say that even a fight he once thought he could win with ease had ended in a brutal struggle, thanks to these 2. Now that he was back to being just human, titles like Top Magus no longer felt appropriate. With that thought, he looked down at the health report in his hand. Was that near miraculous regeneration the result of Xiaomi gaining some degree of immortality through the Shadow Realm, or had it already become something that transcended magecraft entirely? You're just in time. Have you figured anything out from the intel I sent back from the Singularity? Xiaomi asked. Singularity XE. The Tasaka residence, as you called it. Based on our analysis, all we can confirm is that a massive magecraft incident occurred there, erasing the entire area. Romani glanced at Morgan. That part of the analysis was handled by your wife. Huh? Xiaomi blinked in surprise. Morgan gave a peculiar smile. What's so surprising? I told you I was helping out, didn't I? No. I remember you saying things like maintaining human order is boring or something along those lines. Xiaomi shook his head. I thought helping with the spirit transfer and intel analysis was already the limit of what you were willing to do. It's nothing. The intel was something my husband brought back. I simply didn't want to leave the analysis to anyone else. Morgan stated this possessively, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Romani let out a string of awkward laughs. Ha 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 ha. You 2 really are something. Speaking of which, Xiaomi said with a smile, this is your second life. Haven't you thought about settling down these past 10 years? Haven't had the time. Romani responded casually, though what he said was pretty harsh. Just being able to watch Magi in my downtime is already the height of luxury for me. Xiaomi was about to ask what Magi was, but Morgan's expression suddenly turned dangerously sharp. That man. Even locked away in a tower, he still finds time for that kind of nonsense? Seems like I made a mistake not blocking his clairvoyance. Romani immediately started pleading. Come on, don't. I know he's the world's biggest loser, but he's still the manager of Magi. The focus of his plea was a bit odd. It's fine, it's fine. Morgan wouldn't actually do anything. Xiaomi quickly stepped in to vouch for her, finally easing Romani's nerves. With Xiaomi's condition confirmed, Romani was ready to leave. But just as he reached for the door, Xiaomi called out again. One more thing. What's your take on level A inner Fluros appearing in the void? Fluros is indeed one of Solomon's 72 demon gods. But there's also an obscure Magus lineage recorded in the clock tower that uses the name Fluros. Romani paused to think. Whether there's any connection. I can't say. Whether it was as a king in life or as a servant after death, he'd never really looked into the demon gods in detail. Which meant, even now, there were still a lot of things he didn't know. And those black shadows that fought alongside Lev. Xiaomi's expression turned pensive. We only clashed for a moment, but... After some hesitation, he finally voiced his thoughts. The power those massive black shadows wielded was at the level of demon gods. Romani looked surprised. Demon god level? I don't need to spell out the comparison point, do I? Xiaomi fixed his eyes on him. You're not able to command or control the demon gods anymore, right? No. They might be a little strange, but they're all good guys. Romani quickly defended his old familiars. So maybe these just happen to be beings with similar power. His sincerity was plain as day. Even a child could tell. Well, let's go with that for now. As they spoke, the Chaldea broadcast rang out, summoning those scheduled for Spiritron transfer to report to the control room once ready. Romani rubbed his forehead. Sorry. I should have picked a better time to visit. Didn't mean to intrude on your moment. Chapter 227, Control Room. Nervous? Xiaomi asked as he watched Sakura check her combat suit. A little. Something did go wrong during the last Spiritron transfer experiment. Sakura still felt the lingering fear. She wasn't worried about herself. She was afraid something might happen to him again. That's why I'm going with you this time. Xiaomi patted her on the head. Dad, you're being way too reckless. After he took his hand away, Sakura rubbed her head with both hands. I'm not even close to the level where I can use imaginary space to jump through time and space. Xiaomi chuckled. By the time you can do that on your own, maybe you'll be on par with a magician. Or would that only get you a grand designation? Whatever, that kind of stuff doesn't matter. Sakura puffed her cheeks in protest. As they chatted, the coffins finished their preparations, and the three teams entered their respective units. Counter-summoning system, activate. Initiating Spiritron conversion. First Singularity Team, Olga Marie Animasphere, Ritsuko Fujimaru, Mash Carry Elite. Spiritron conversion complete. Second Singularity Team, Karan Xiaomi, Gray. Spiritron conversion complete. Fourth Singularity Team, Denkai Xiaomi, Sakura Xiaomi. Spiritron conversion complete. Staff members in the control room reported the status of each conversion in turn. The singularities were designated from the first to the fourth, based on confirmed coordinates and time periods. Begin formal verification of designated priority levels, first, second, and fourth. Romani issued the command. The Spiritron transfer system then activated. Within the coffins, the masters and servants were separated and transferred to different destinations. The coffins were completely sealed off from the outside, their interiors reduced to nothingness. Inside, their bodies converted into Spiritrons and traveled to their respective eras. For those inside, the entire process took only an instant. When Sakura opened her eyes again, she felt the wind howling around her. Looking up, she saw a sky blanketed with dark clouds. Below, hundreds of meters down, a city cloaked in thick fog stretched out. What? What is this? Her heart leapt into her throat. The moment the transfer completed, she and Xiaomi had materialized in midair, only to be immediately pulled downward by gravity. So this is what a proper Spiritron transfer feels like. Xiaomi shouted, then reached toward her. Grab my hand, Sakura. Okay. Locking fingers with her father brought Sakura instant relief. Steady your breathing. Activate anti-gravity magecraft. Xiaomi instructed. Amid the roaring wind, Sakura followed his guidance and initiated the spell. In an instant, their fall slowed. Then, she noticed Xiaomi activating a second spell. This is... Sakura immediately realized his intent. As they descended, she began to sense the poisonous nature of the fog. Any living being would be at risk after inhaling too much of it. Xiaomi had deployed a protective rune spell, shielding them from all harmful toxins. With this, they could move safely within the fog. Sakura could have done it herself, but Xiaomi cast it for both of them, saving a bit of her mana. I'd heard that London was called the City of Fog in the 18th and 19th centuries. After landing lightly, Xiaomi frowned as he scanned the fog-shrouded city. But I never imagined it'd be like this. The fog's toxicity wasn't just from industrial pollution. It also contained a notable concentration of mana. It definitely wasn't something that should exist in the air as part of the greater source. I can't sense any other people nearby. Sakura crouched down and pressed her palm to the stone-paved ground, linking herself with London's ley lines. This was one of the skills she had learned at the clock tower. Standard knowledge for all students there. A poor resonance with London's land and ley lines could hinder any progress in magecraft studies and research. Though such incompatibility was extremely rare among magus, it wasn't unheard of. Xiaomi activated the communicator and contacted Chaldea. This is the London Singularity. Spiritron transfer complete. We've arrived safely. After a brief burst of static, the connection came through clearly. The other two teams have also arrived at their destinations, but Olga Marie's team ran into a squad of French soldiers. Karen and Gray have already encountered a girl leading an army, came Morgan's voice. Only my husband's team hasn't encountered any enemies yet. Yes. Xiaomi glanced around and confirmed it. He sharpened his focus, listening for the slightest sound. Nothing. No signs of enemies or anything else nearby. Dad, look. Sakura suddenly stood and pointed toward the sky through the dense fog. He looked up. Even with the heavy fog and thick cloud cover, he could vaguely make out an enormous circular halo overhead, like some kind of ornament suspended above the entire city. A massive halo? Or is it a band of light? Xiaomi murmured. I cross-referenced the data. Similar objects were spotted in the skies above Orleans and Rome too. This time it was Romani, managing operations from the control room, who chimed in. There are others in the singularities too. Xiaomi stared solemnly at the barely visible ring. If it was only seen in one place, we might have dismissed it as a coincidence. Maybe it's some underlying great all-singularity share, Morgan offered. Xiaomi pressed further. What kind of trait? Hard to say. It might have to do with the Holy Grail, or maybe it's tied to whoever created the singularities in the first place. Morgan's answer was vague, almost evasive, like she knew more than she was willing to share. Xiaomi nodded quietly. He got the hint. Either way, let's mark this as an important observation. It gives me the creeps, Sakura muttered, still staring upward with a frown. Well, it is a singularity. Late 19th century London already feels eerie enough, just from how deserted it is. Xiaomi stopped mid-sentence as a sudden chill raced down his spine. The nature of the fog shifted drastically in mere seconds. Sakura. Eh? Before she could react, Xiaomi pulled her into his arms. A screeching clash of blades rang out behind them, making her flinch. Twisting around from within Xiaomi's embrace, she saw him fending off an attacker with a pistol in his left hand. Huh? That's weird. How'd they find us? And the fog's not affecting them at all. Even though they're human. A white-haired girl emerged slowly from the mist, cloaked in black and holding a pair of daggers longer than her forearms. Her expression was one of annoyed confusion. A servant? Class. Assassin? Is there a Holy Grail war happening here too? Xiaomi helped Sakura to her feet, leveling his spear at the assassin girl with wary precision. Chapter 228, The assassin girl didn't respond to Xiaomi's question. A cruel yet gleeful smile spread across her youthful face. Hee hee. I'm so happy. Found a good prey. Why are you walking with a man? Her attention was entirely fixed on Sakura, clearly displeased that Xiaomi was protecting her. Am I her target? Sakura stayed alert but wasn't panicked. With her father shielding her, she had the space to contemplate the assassin's true name. Well, not that it matters. I'll deal with the nuisance first, then entertain you with a face full of innocent cheer. Assassin stashed her two long daggers and started fumbling behind her small frame. Sakura, step back. This one's a servant who specializes in killing women. Xiaomi smoothly moved to shield Sakura behind him. Suddenly, Assassin crossed her arms. Between each of her fingers, black and red weapons glinted. 6 small but deadly throwing knives shot toward them. Xiaomi swung his spear in a perfect arc, knocking all the projectiles out of the air. You slipped, Assassin. Xiaomi didn't underestimate her just because she looked like a child. Though seeing such a young girl did remind him of Karin as a child. If you're going to kill, maybe keep your mouth shut first. Oh no. How scary, mister. Assassin widened her eyes, pretending to be frightened, though her gaze betrayed nothing but excitement and murderous intent. You're amazing. Xiaomi steadied his breath. In his eyes, she was only a servant. Her identity and appearance didn't matter. In a flash, he lunged forward, his spear aiming straight for the girl's heart. Assassin, built for agility, quickly raised her dagger to parry, managing to divert the thrust meant for her heart. But not before it sliced her arm. The white-haired girl tumbled across the ground, then gritted her teeth and got back on her feet, face twisted in fury. You hurt us. That's just mean. Mean? Xiaomi fixed his eyes on her, looking for his next opening. You targeted our precious daughter without a word. Who's the cruel one here, executioner? Sakura covered her mouth, inwardly cringing at Xiaomi's choice of words. Despite the tense situation, she couldn't help but giggle. Daughter? The girl's eyes widened with an emotion Shiomi couldn't quite read. That's not fair. That's so unfair. You even have parents. Huh? Shiomi blinked, confused. He had no idea why Assassin was suddenly so agitated. Her killing intent had intensified. We've been searching for our mother. This is unforgivable. Assassin hurled her knives again. The trajectory was too obvious. This time, Shiomi advanced while deflecting the blades with ease. But Assassin leapt back, retreating into the thick fog. She ran? Shiomi halted at the spot where she had just stood, puzzled. Then, the fog thickened until even his own feet were hard to see. Alarmed, he turned back. Sakura's figure had already vanished into the mist. And it wasn't just the visibility. The fog was now infused with a toxicity far more intense than when they first landed, and a denser concentration of mana. Shiomi's instincts screamed that something was wrong. This wasn't just any magical fog. It was Assassin's noble phantasm. For someone who had endured the Land of Shadows, it wasn't much of a threat. But for Sakura, Omegas, even if it wasn't lethal, it would still inflict serious harm. Realizing that, Shiomi turned and dashed in her direction. Only for an unsettling sound to echo through the thick fog. Hell starts here. We are the fire, the rain, the power. A childlike voice echoed through the dense fog. Assassin possessed more than one noble phantasm. The first was a bounded field type that generated the poisonous mist. The second was a weapon worthy of her title as an assassin. A noble phantasm for assassination. Let the slaughter begin. Maria the Ripper. Divine Saber. Assassin wasn't foolish. She quickly realized Shiomi wouldn't be easy to handle. Using the toxic fog from her first noble phantasm as cover, she stealthily closed in on Sakura and activated her second noble phantasm, aiming to carve the pitiful girl apart on the spot. But as the sound of her noble phantasm rang out and the dagger closed in, its path aided by the fog's intensified toxicity slowing Sakura's movements. Lightning suddenly crashed down, striking all around her. Sakura had unleashed grand magecraft. One bolt hit the approaching assassin, disrupting her attack. What should have been a fatal strike was reduced to a shallow cut across Sakura's shoulder. No way. Assassin stumbled back, dodging Shiomi's following thrust. She hadn't expected her noble phantasm to be broken so abruptly. Badly injured, Assassin immediately retreated into the fog. Shiomi couldn't leave the wounded Sakura behind to give chase. He crouched beside her, placing his hand near the wound on her shoulder as healing magic lit up the space. As the pain gradually eased, Sakura's expression relaxed. Dad. Don't speak yet. Assassin's bounded field hasn't fully lifted. Focus your mana on resisting the fog's toxicity, Shiomi said gently. No, I think I've figured out Assassin's true name, Sakura said. She must be. But to her surprise, Sakura found herself unable to recall Assassin's face. The clues were fading, even the name of the noble phantasm was slipping from her mind. It's part of Assassin's ability, Shiomi said, also feeling the memory slipping. But he had a countermeasure. The 14th primordial rune, the rune of knowledge. Assassin had used her ability to erase all traces of her identity from their minds. But Shiomi used the rune to preserve what little information remained. Jack the Ripper. In unison, Sakura and Shiomi spoke the name. This era is exactly when Jack the Ripper was active, Shiomi mused. But she's a servant. It seems the singularity is already starting to distort, Sakura said as her wound continued to heal and her strength returned. Shiomi supported her by the arm and helped her up. Can you stand? I'm still a little dizzy. Maybe Jack the Ripper's weapon was poisoned. Sakura leaned lightly against him. If you really can't stand, I'll carry you, Shiomi said with a chuckle. Don't let growing up make you shy. Sakura's eyes lit up. Really? When have I ever lied to you? Just as Shiomi lifted Sakura onto his back and was about to look for a safe place to rest, the sound of armored footsteps echoed on the stone pavement through the fog. The traces of battle just now came from this direction. A knight in white armor emerged from the mist. All three widened their eyes. Chapter 229, Mord.Red. Even after more than 10 years, Sakura could never forget the events of the Fifth Holy Grail War. Those few brief days fighting side by side with the servant named Mordred. Though they lost in the end, Sakura had never once doubted Mordred's strength. She only blamed herself for not being strong enough. Unlike her father, who could even surpass the King of Heroes. Ugh! Isn't his mother's boy toy? Mordred pulled a disgusted face, but her tone was surprisingly familiar. Wait, why are you even here, Master? Huh? Sakura froze. Shiomi also stood stunned. He was too surprised to even react to Mordred's incredibly rude jab at him as mother's boy toy. What shocked him more was that Mordred actually recognized both him and Sakura. Saber. You remember us? Sakura asked. Normally, when servants are summoned, they don't retain memories once they return to the throne. Even if the same servant is summoned multiple times across different Holy Grail wars, they wouldn't recall past summonings. Unless, like Artoria, they made a contract with the world before death, freezing their existence at the final moment of life rather than coming from the throne of heroes. Oh, right. Mordred blinked as though just realizing it herself, her expression a little confused. Yeah, I don't really get it either, but the moment I saw you two, I remembered. Weird thing is, I hadn't realized it at all before this. Sakura glanced at Shiomi in puzzlement. He, in turn, began analyzing the possible reasons. Probably a correction made by the counter-force when summoning Mordred to this singularity. Since Sakura and I are here, it might have judged that recalling past memories would help stabilize the singularity. Or something like that. You're still saying stuff no one understands, Magus. Mordred laughed as she approached Shiomi and clapped him on the shoulder. The Knight of the Sword no longer bore the wariness of a patrolling sentinel. Instead, she had the ease of someone reuniting with an old friend. If she can remember, then that's the best outcome, Sakura said, clearly relieved. Then Mordred noticed Sakura being carried on Shiomi's back and tilted her head. What's going on, Master? Why are you being carried? We ran into Assassin and got into a fight, Shiomi explained with a shake of his head. Because of a lack of intel, Assassin used two noble phantasms in tandem and managed to injure Sakura. Mordred's face turned serious. Assassin? Don't tell me. You ran into Jack the Ripper? You already know her true name? Shiomi asked. Yeah. I've run into that little creep a few times while patrolling the city. Loves using the fog to launch sneak attacks, Mordred said. The whole city's covered in mist. Perfect fit for her lore. Not that it works on me. With her high magic resistance, Assassin's mist had no effect on Mordred. The second noble phantasm, which required close range, was also easily disrupted by the crimson lightning unleashed through her mana. Just like what happened with Shiomi earlier. Even the first noble phantasm couldn't breach her defenses. Their compatibility was just about the worst possible. Got it. Shiomi looked at Mordred. So, is there a Holy Grail war happening in London right now? As far as Shiomi knew, a ritual like the Holy Grail war would never be permitted in London, the stronghold of Magus. For one, too many Magus would be aware of it, causing inevitable chaos. More importantly, the Mages Association wouldn't allow it in the first place. After all, buried beneath the clock tower lies the spiritual tomb of Albion. A repository of mystery, still harboring countless unknowns even after 2 millennia. So, with both Assassin and Saber appearing in succession, Shiomi tentatively concluded that this might be a Holy Grail war that never existed in proper history. No, there isn't, Mordred replied bluntly. What? I mean, no Mega summoned me to begin with. Mordred's expression turned serious. When I arrived here, I already knew I wasn't brought in by the Holy Grail. Shiomi's brow twitched. So it has nothing to do with the Holy Grail? While summoning servants outside the Holy Grail war wasn't unheard of, cases like that were rare. Over a decade ago, Dr. Heartless had been one such example. But that summoning, bringing forth Hephaestion, had involved exploiting loopholes and resulted in an unusual outcome. Now, with both Assassin and Saber appearing in this London singularity seemingly unrelated to any Holy Grail war, Shiomi realized past precedents might no longer apply. Really? Could it be that the summoner is deliberately hiding their presence? Sakura asked again, trying to confirm the details. Can't say for sure. But at the very least, I don't feel any mana link to anyone, Master, Mordred said with a smile. Don't call me Master. We don't have a contract right now, Sakura said, flustered. Just call me Sakura. Shiomi suddenly interjected, it's not out of the question. If my guess is right, Mordred is a stray servant. Like one who lost their master in a Holy Grail war. Only in this case, she never had a master to begin with. Fine by me. Mordred held out her hand. I've been drawing mana from the land itself, which makes fighting feel restricted. If I could form a contract with a trustworthy master, I'd be able to fight full throttle. Her straightforward manner, coupled with the battle they'd just survived, made Sakura feel that forming a contract with Mordred in this singularity was necessary. So Sakura climbed down from Shiomi's back, stood firm, and reached out to touch palms with Mordred. I declare, my body shall be your shield, and my fate shall rest upon your blade. In the name of Saber, I, Knight Mordred, swear to recognize you as my master, Sakura. Ever since becoming a Chaldea master involved in humanity's restoration, Sakura had possessed command spells with slightly altered properties. The marks on the back of her hand glowed. The contract was renewed. Just then, a mechanical sound echoed down the street. Mordred summoned her silver longsword and turned toward the source of the noise. Steam-powered machines, like something out of a dreamlike steampunk nightmare, began marching toward them. The hostility radiating from them was unmistakable. "What are those?" Shiomi asked, pulling Sakura protectively toward him. He was still wary. Assassin might be lurking nearby, and he wasn't about to get separated from Sakura in the fog again. "We usually call them helter-skelters," Mordred explained. "Looks like we'll have to take a detour before heading to the base. Been a while since I've teamed up with a master. Let me cut loose a little." And with that, Mordred charged into the mechanical horde like a one-woman army. Shiomi, who had been about to summon the white ash wand for a defensive fight, let his guard down. Looks like he could leave the heavy lifting to Mordred this time. Chapter 230, half an hour later, in an apartment in London. This was the base Mordred had mentioned, but it turned out she wasn't the only one living here. The apartment's owner was a young man who appeared to be around the same age as Shiomi and introduced himself as Henry Jekyll. Shiomi recognized the name. The protagonist of the famous novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, who, after drinking a certain potion, would manifest a violent alternate personality named Hyde. Shiomi had always thought it was just a fictional story from modern literature, but clearly, such a person had truly existed in history. More importantly, unlike Mordred, he wasn't a servant, but a living person native to the era of this singularity. This way, she'll be fully in sync with the ley lines of this land, and Saber's contract can function at full capacity, Sakura said as she activated the communicator. On the projected screen appeared Morgan, who was overseeing support on Shiomi's side. Mordred, who had just pulled a beer from the fridge and taken a sip, choked on it in surprise when Morgan's image appeared. Shiomi was even more surprised to find that this apartment had a home refrigerator, despite the fact that such appliances had only been invented about 10 years ago in this timeline. Then Mordred learned that although she had been defeated by the King of Heroes and exited the stage during the final moments of the Fifth Holy Grail War in Fuyuki, Morgan and Shiomi had not lost. After taking all this in, Jekyll began explaining the current situation to Shiomi and the others. About 3 days ago, a mysterious magical fog enveloped London, cutting the city off completely from the outside world. With chaos-inducing mechanical soldiers and magecraft puppets roaming the streets, the city had fallen into paralysis within days. This explained why Shiomi and Sakura had barely seen any people outside. The fog was harmful to humans. Civilians were either hiding indoors, too afraid to go out, or had already fallen unconscious. Jekyll included. That left the investigation to Mordred, who had arrived at this singularity 3 days earlier and was taken in by Jekyll. "I think I get it now." Shiomi was starting to piece things together. Just as he was about to ask Jekyll whether he contacted the clock tower, Jekyll continued with his explanation. "I've been trying to figure out the truth behind this fog for the past few days. But this morning, the friend who was helping me investigate went missing. Since I can't leave the apartment, I asked Mordred to go look for Dr. Frankenstein. Then, on the way, I heard the sounds of fighting," Mordred said, pointing at Shiomi and Sakura with a hand still holding her beer bottle. "That's how she'd ended up at the scene." "They're probably dead," Morgan stated calmly, offering the most likely conclusion. "London has become a singularity, and the magical fog was created by the mastermind behind it. If it were me, I wouldn't allow anyone to uncover the truth either." "Ugh." Mordred let out a sound that was hard to describe. "Mordred, if you disagree with my analysis, don't hesitate to say so," Morgan said with a faint smile. "No, not at all," Mordred quickly denied. Shiomi leaned against the armrest of the sofa. "But Jekyll said he only lost contact with Dr. Frankenstein this morning. If we head over there now, we might still be able to confirm if he's alive. And if the worst has already happened, we could at least start tracking the mastermind behind all this." The calamity known as the incineration of humanity was far too massive for Lev to have orchestrated alone. That man was clearly just another pawn in the larger scheme. "Then before heading to the clock tower, should we make a detour to Dr. Frankenstein's home and investigate?" Sakura asked, confirming their next move. Her question drew Jekyll's attention. He shook his head with a regretful look. "My lady, I hate to disappoint you, but the clock tower has already fallen." "I see," Sakura replied with a sigh. "Knew it would come to this," Shiomi added, completely unsurprised. They had already anticipated it on their way here with Mordred. As the heart of the Magus, the clock tower was one of the Mages Association's most functional institutions and had the closest ties to the world of magecraft. Anyone attempting to create a singularity in this city and distort history would have been detected by the Magi first. Naturally, they would have responded immediately. Which meant the correct strategy was to eliminate the clock tower first. Wipe out the resistance and clear the way. But to pull off something like that, "You two really aren't surprised at all," Jekyll said, realizing he'd probably been overthinking things. Mordred laughed heartily. "My master is a first-rate magus. Of course she would have anticipated something like this right away. Not at all, Sakura replied humbly as she sipped her tea. It's all thanks to Father and Lady Mother's guidance. Mordred glanced at the projection of Morgan, who was still linked to their call, and swirled her beer bottle. That reminds me, I never got to ask. Why does Master use an honorific for Mother? Shiomi was just Dad, but Morgan was Lady Mother. Because she is Lady Mother. Anything less just feels wrong, Sakura answered simply. Huh. Mordred had the urge to mock Sakura's reverence toward Morgan but decided it wasn't the right time. Sakura's a good girl. Much better than someone who would look their so-called father in the eye and call him my mother's boy toy, Morgan said with a teasing smile. True, Shiomi chimed in. Embarrassed, Mordred scowled and shot a glare at Jekyll, who was laughing. She hadn't realized Morgan could hear them at the time. As for who Morgan really was, Mordred had given up trying to figure it out. She left the question in a deliberately vague space, neither acknowledging her as mother nor outright denying it. Oh, right. Why did Saber say Dad was just a boy toy? Sakura suddenly remembered and complained, even if you don't want to accept his position, you didn't have to put it like that, did you? Mordred took a swig of her beer and grumbled, whatever. I'll call him what I want. If you've got a problem with that, go ahead and use your command spell. The command spells created by Chaldea aren't as strong as the ones from the Fuiuki Holy Grail War, Sakura said, glancing regretfully at the mark on the back of her hand. Whoa, whoa, whoa. If they were strong enough, you'd seriously waste one just for that? Seems like the perfect use to me, Sakura said, blinking innocently. Listening to Sakura and Mordred go back and forth, with Morgan occasionally throwing in a sharp remark, Shiomi finally started to relax. The tension in his body began to ease as he decided to take a short rest before moving on. Chapter 231, just as Morgan had said, Dr. Frankenstein had been attacked. After resting for an hour, Shiomi headed to the doctor's residence with Sakura and Mordred, only to find the place completely deserted. There wasn't even a corpse left behind, yet Shiomi could tell without a doubt. Dr. Frankenstein had been killed. Huh? You ran into Father again in the Fuiuki Singularity? And he was corrupted by the Black Mud? While searching the room for clues, Sakura casually chatted with Mordred and brought up the Fuiuki incident. She had originally wanted to discuss the common traits between the two singularities, but as expected, Mordred latched onto something else entirely. A pitch-black king of knights, huh? Mordred's expression turned serious. Cold, ruthless, and decisive, Shiomi replied, picking up a notebook from the desk and answering in Sakura's place. You could still tell it was Artoria Pendragon, but she was completely devoid of emotion. If she had been like that in life, history would probably remember her as a merciless tyrant. Mordred lowered her eyes, lips curling in a conflicted grin. I see. The rebellious knight found herself surprised. If Father had truly been that kind of person, maybe Britannia would have turned out differently. Maybe even her own rebellion would have been crushed without a chance. We can talk about the King of Knights later. Take a look at this, Shiomi said, holding up the notebook. Seems like Dr. Frankenstein was in the middle of writing it when he was killed. Sakura and Mordred immediately leaned in to read the note in Shiomi's hand. In it, the doctor wrote about uncovering a scheme called the Project Demonic Fog. The details were still unclear, but the plan's leaders were identified only by the initials P, B, and M. Each of them wielded magecraft beyond the scope of human intellect. Likely heroic spirits. The entry abruptly stopped there, the rest of the page stained with blood. P, B, M. Shiomi murmured. Very suspicious. He probably found out more, but was silenced before he could write it all down. Sakura activated her communicator. I'll scan and archive this note. It might come in handy later. Saber, could you check the rest of the room again? Hold on, Master, Mordred interrupted, holding out her arm. The fogs changed direction. Shiomi's brow lifted slightly as he tightened his grip on his wand. They had already noticed the magical fog had seeped into the room. Unlike Jekyll's apartment, the barrier protecting this place had lost its function after Dr. Frankenstein's death. But now, something about the fog had changed. It had taken on a more sinister, poisonous quality. One they all recognized. The venomous miasma was slowly creeping into the room from outside. Persistent bastard. It's barely been 2 hours since our last encounter, Shiomi muttered, stepping forward and pointing his wand at the door. Jack the Ripper. The door creaked open, and a sharp wind rushed into the room, carried by an even denser wave of magical energy. Shiomi stepped outside onto the front steps, gazing down at the narrow garden path leading up to the door. But Jack the Ripper wasn't alone. There was also a jester-like servant standing with her, and behind them loomed a tall, thin man in white robes. All three were servants. And the man in white, lean and silent, was clearly their leader. Or rather, Their master. What a warm welcome. Besides the little serial killer, we've got two more weirdos. Mordred bared her teeth in a vicious grin at the enemy. Wait a second. Sakura was analyzing the spirit origins of the three servants using Chaldea's system. Caster. There are two of them. That all but confirmed their earlier suspicion. Heroic spirit summoning in London wasn't linked to a Holy Grail war. Something else was at work. I didn't expect our ambush to fail right out the gate. Just as my friend M predicted, you're not someone easily dealt with, Tenkai Shiomi. The gaunt man in white spoke as if he'd known Shiomi all along, casually calling him by name. So, what's it going to be? Shiomi raised his wand, ready for battle. Now that you know who I am, are you going to surrender quietly, or die here and now? He narrowed his eyes. Or maybe, before that. How about a name, Caster? Unfortunately, my companions and I still have a mission to complete. Surrender isn't part of the plan. The white-clad man raised the sword in his hand. You may call me P. That's. Sakura stepped closer to Shiomi and whispered, the weapon in Caster's hand. It's the Aoth sword. The Aoth sword? P. Shiomi's mind clicked through the names of heroic spirits, cross-referencing the clues. I see. So it's Paracelsus von Hohenheim. The Aoth sword was a mystic code originally created through alchemy by that very magus. Rumor had it he never let it leave his side. Shiomi had made the right guess on the first try. Paracelsus wore his usual faint, melancholic expression. As expected. My true name was seen through instantly. I was too careless. So, can we start already? I'm still hungry after killing those adults just now. Jack the Ripper urged impatiently. That girl's got so much mana. If we kill her, I'll be stuffed for sure. Of course, Jack the Ripper. And as for you, you'll be answering for your failure. Mephistopheles. Paracelsus showed no intention of concealing his servants' true names as he calmly issued the order to attack. Oh, come on. I'm a pacifist, you know. Mephistopheles drawled lazily, raising the oversized pair of scissors he used as a weapon. You left Dr. Frankenstein's notes intact on purpose. Left behind a fatal clue. This is your mess to clean up, Paracelsus said. If you defeat them all here, your task will be complete. The subtle exchange made Shiomi sense something off. But before he could press the issue, Jack the Ripper and Mephistopheles sprang into action, lunging toward the trio at the doorway. At the same time, Paracelsus, standing in the courtyard, raised the Aoth sword. 5 differently colored gemstones whirled around its blade. The sword's embedded mana surged outward, activating a ritual magecraft that locked onto their position. Chapter 232, Simulating True Ether with the 5 Great Elements? Upon witnessing the magecraft, or rather, the noble phantasm, unleashed by Paracelsus, Shiomi was taken aback. He hadn't expected that a historical figure famed as a master of the 5 elements could perform magecraft of this caliber. Out of my way. Mordred flared her mana, forcing Jack the Ripper and Mephistopheles to retreat. She knew the white-robed man's magecraft was extremely dangerous. Staying here any longer would only spell disaster. Mordred, take Sakura and fall back. I'll handle this. Shiomi struck the ground with his staff, and a magic circle composed of runes immediately appeared beneath him. Without hesitation, Mordred picked Sakura up and leapt toward the broader part of the courtyard. You're already too late. Paracelsus declared calmly. He had no interest in Mordred or Sakura. His sole target was Tenkai Shiomi. Behold my radiance, said the elementalist. Noble phantasm, restricted release. Philosopher's stone, activate. Ultra-high-density mana, focus. Beam. Fire. In an instant, the 5 elements condensed, transforming into pseudo-true ether, and fired straight at Shiomi. With a thunderous crash, Dr. Frankenstein's mansion and the front facade began to collapse under the noble phantasm's impact. Held back by Jack and Mephistopheles, both Sakura and Mordred felt a deep unease as they feared for Shiomi's safety. But Paracelsus, even after releasing the true name of his noble phantasm, felt no triumph. He saw it. Just before the strike landed, an uncanny rune-based magecraft flared to life, directly intercepting his attack. Through the haze of smoke, a pale blue light shimmered. Proof that Shiomi still stood. Now witness what true ether truly is, Shiomi said. Since the age of gods receded from the world's surface, the mana in the atmosphere had gradually thinned until it vanished entirely with the arrival of the Common Era. Magecraft and the occult persisted only through the 5th imaginary element. Ether. By contrast, the magical element that had once been widespread during the Age of Gods was known as true ether. The true 5th element. Though it had disappeared from the surface, pockets of true ether still existed. For instance, the paradise where the magus of flowers had been sealed away. Or the land of shadows, brimming with the very concept of death. All were places even magi could not reach. Since returning from the land of shadows to the world of man, Xiaomi had changed the way he used magecraft. The reason was simple: with the age of gods gone, the continued presence of true ether could introduce unpredictable changes to the already unstable foundations of human order since the start of the Common Era. That was the parting warning left by his master. And Xiaomi had faithfully abided by it. Even without relying on true ether, Xiaomi could wield the magecraft his master had passed down with a skill equal to any modern magus. That is. Paracelsus stared at the mana Xiaomi had gathered, a look of surprise crossing his face. He could sense something extraordinary within it. True ether had manifested. This was a singularity. A distortion in human history. Once the singularity was corrected, all phenomena that defied the proper course of human history would vanish without a trace. And so, as a show of respect to the top-tier magus who had managed to simulate true ether, Xiaomi decided to reveal his trump card. Feel it with your soul. This is the lost mystery of the Age of Gods. Xiaomi's hair whipped wildly in the wind as he raised his staff, aiming it straight at Paracelsus. There's nowhere left for you to run, Paracelsus von Hohenheim. I see. No wonder my friend M was so wary of you. A magus from the Age of Gods like you should have remained in the Wandering Sea or Atlas Institute. Paracelsus raised the Oath sword but didn't launch another spell. Instead, he began absorbing the residual true ether spilling from Xiaomi's magecraft. The sword's true ability. A spirit particle computation device. Could analyze an opponent's mana, adapt to it, and eventually consume it, converting it into its own power. However, as the blade composed of the Philosopher's Stone absorbed the true ether, it began to emit a mournful cry. Answer me, Paracelsus. Why did you help create this singularity, and who gave you the orders? Xiaomi demanded. What's your connection to Lovely Einer Fleros? There's no need to question me. If you are truly the one who brings hope, you'll naturally find the path to the end, Paracelsus replied, unshaken. Even as cracks had begun forming in his Oath sword, unable to withstand the strain of true ether. I have my own cause. I will never betray my comrades or our plan, not for survival, nor for death. And besides, victory is not yet yours. As he spoke, the space behind him abruptly twisted, connecting to a place far removed from here. Just like the spatial magecraft Professor Love had used when retreating from Singularity F. With the Holy Grail in hand, even this is possible. Paracelsus acknowledged his defeat and declared coolly, I'll concede this battle to you. But the war still belongs to us. TCH. Xiaomi gritted his teeth and, in the split second before the spell completed, unleashed a devastating blast from the spinning magic array before him, swallowing Paracelsus whole before shifting toward where Sakura and the others were. He grabbed Saber's arm and dragged her into imaginary number space. Jack and Mephistopheles, unable to react in time, were engulfed by Xiaomi's magecraft. In an instant, the white courtyard was reduced to a blank white void. The ground looked as if it had been gouged out. Sunken nearly half a meter into a massive crater. When the spell finally ceased, Xiaomi dropped to one knee, gasping for breath. In a place devoid of true ether, using his aberrantly composed magic circuits to forcefully produce it brought an immense burden. It had been a long time since he felt exhaustion like this. Trying to annihilate 3 servants in one strike had pushed both his output and consumption far beyond normal limits. Jack the Ripper and Mephistopheles, caught in the blast, lay sprawled on the ground. Though they struggled to rise, their spirit cores had already been destroyed. Mordred re-emerged in the courtyard with Sakura. Seeing the defeated servants, she gave a low whistle in awe. Dad. Sakura rushed over and helped Xiaomi up from the ruins near the mansion's entrance. I'm fine. Just need to catch my breath, Xiaomi said with a smile, reassuring her. Paracelsus used the Holy Grail to escape. With 2 servants lost, he won't be back anytime soon. You and Mordred check Frankenstein's house. See if there's anything else useful. Then prepare to return to the base. Chapter 233, Judging from the outcome, Paracelsus's original plan had been to ambush and eliminate the Chaldea group while they were investigating Dr. Frankenstein's residence. But clearly, among Paracelsus's companions, those who called themselves P and were recorded in the doctor's notes as B and M. Someone knew of Xiaomi, or at least had access to intelligence about him. The available information, however, was incomplete. Paracelsus miscalculated. Even with his prized noble phantasm, he failed to destroy Xiaomi and lost 2 servants in the process. On the way back to Jekyll's apartment, Xiaomi explained his conclusions to Sakura and Mordred. So you're saying that Mephistopheles probably didn't want to help Paracelsus, but had no choice? So when he was ordered to kill the doctor, he deliberately left the notes intact? Sakura nodded. Then when Jack the Ripper happened to engage us and realized we'd arrived at the singularity, they decided to go along with it and set up the ambush there? That's the most likely explanation, Xiaomi said with a shrug. They had very little intel to go on. The mere presence of two servants sharing the same class was already enough to suggest something strange. A singularity where there was no Holy Grail war, yet the Holy Grail still existed. There had to be deeper secrets behind heroic spirit summoning. The founding of the Holy Grail War in Fuyuki and the establishment of the three Magus families must have been based on a prior understanding of these truths, which allowed them to gradually refine the system. Thinking along those lines, Shiomi felt more certain. He needed to make a trip to the clock tower. "What are you thinking about, Saber?" Sakura asked. "It's nothing." Mordred replied with a faint scowl. "Just remembered there was a homunculus in one of the rooms at the doctor's house. One that would never wake up." As someone who had also been created, Mordred couldn't help but care about artificially made life. "Frankenstein. The infamous scientist," Sakura murmured. "A character born of science fiction, yet based on a real historical figure. Most likely Paracelsus or one of his allies was responsible. They wanted to eliminate anything that might help Chaldea restore the singularity," Shiomi said, glancing again at Mordred. "What? Do I have blood on my face or something?" Mordred asked, wiping her cheek. "No, I was just thinking. If servants can appear even without a Holy Grail war, then what would happen if we actually performed a summoning ritual under those conditions?" Shiomi mused aloud as he walked. Originally, Chaldea was supposed to establish a heroic spirit summoning system, calling forth cooperative servants to aid in restoring human order. But to date, Chaldea had only 3 successful cases of summoning. Romani, who had become human, had once relied on the Fuyuki Holy Grail War's summoning system. Mash, or rather, the one who lent her power, had refused to appear before the events of Singularity F and Da Vinci. The third case had always been cautious and held reservations about Chaldea's methods. If not for the severity of the current situation, she wouldn't have shown herself to act as a technical advisor. Now, Shiomi was seriously considering the feasibility of performing a summoning ritual right here in the Singularity. "Mr. Jekyll's apartment is situated on a ley line, right? We could build a summoning circle there, couldn't we, Dad?" Sakura suggested, also finding the idea promising. They couldn't keep relying on the chance of running into stray servants. Even if mana supply wasn't an issue due to the Singularity's unique properties, finding servants who could fight and were willing to cooperate remained a huge challenge. Chaos-bound automatons and magical puppets prowled the streets, and a moment's carelessness could trigger another skirmish. Every encounter sapped their strength. The 3 had returned empty-handed and had already run into 2 such battles on the way back. Just as Jekyll's apartment came into view, the sounds of combat rang out once again. "No." Shiomi broke into a sprint. He had missed something. While Paracelsus and his servants were lying in ambush, his accomplices had launched a flanking maneuver. In other words, they were attacking Jekyll's apartment from the rear. As the 3 rounded a street corner, they came face to face with a street packed with around 20 helter-skelters. The one in the lead stood out. Massive in both size and mana signature. Unlike the others, which were about 2 meters tall, this one stood closer to 2.5, with a weight that couldn't be easily estimated. Spirit origin scan confirmed. Servant detected. Class, caster, came Morgan's voice. Just as the trio drew their weapons, the outermost helter-skelters in the encirclement turned their heads. The eye-like sensors on their faces lit up in a harsh red glow, and white steam hissed from their joints. The dolls equipped with Gatling guns on their right arms raised their barrels. "I'll hold them off," Sakura shouted, rushing forward. She raised her wand and cast a magecraft shield capable of blocking physical attacks. The hail of bullets slammed into the shield, sparking violently with each impact. The relentless barrage made Sakura's arms tremble, but she grit her teeth and stood her ground, buying time for her father and Mordred to strike back. Mordred leapt from behind Sakura, surging forward with mana and diving into the mechanical soldiers. Her silver blade sliced through their armor like it was nothing, disabling one unit after another in just a few strikes. But the helter-skelters equipped with long swords raised their weapons and closed in, flanking Mordred from both sides. They weren't fast, but their sheer brute force was considerable, and even Mordred found herself hard-pressed. Unsure whether more reinforcements might arrive, Shiomi couldn't afford to hesitate. He slashed open his palm, and as his blood hit the ground, it began to crawl outward, forming a heroic spirit summoning circle in seconds. "My wife, I'm initiating a summon. Will you permit it?" Shiomi asked. "No need to ask. Proceed," Morgan replied without the slightest pause. "I declare, your body shall be under my command, and my fate shall be bound to your blade. Heed the summons of the Holy Grail, and follow the path of human order. You, clad in the words of stargazing over 7 nights. Gallop. Fall. Deliver judgment. Guardian of the Scales." Since the 4th Holy Grail War, this was only Shiomi's 2nd time performing a heroic spirit summoning. The incantation had been adjusted to align with Chaldea's protocols. Standing atop the ley line, the ritual, originally meant to be conducted in a spare room at the apartment, was hastily executed on the street. Winds howled and lightning surged. The summoning circle drawn with Shiomi's blood flared to life, then lifted into the air, transforming into a red comet that soared into the sky and burst open, lighting up the skies above London. From that light, like the arrival of the wild hunt in myth, the King of Storms descended. Mounted on a pitch-black steed with a white mane, he charged down from the heavens, crashing into the helter-skelters and toppling them like toys. Lancer, Artoria. I have answered your summons. Just as my beloved steed devours the thunderclouds, my lance shall shatter all walls. I will crush every obstacle that stands in your way. Clad in black armor that concealed even her face, the knight announced her true name, leaving everyone present stunned. Chapter 234, The Summoning of a Heroic Spirit Outside a Holy Grail War at a Singularity should be based on compatibility. Responding to Amagus' intent on repairing the singularity by calling forth the most suitable servant, or the one most attuned to Shiomi. Originally, he had considered the possibility of summoning Morgan again. But this wasn't the Morgan who had altered the contract system and entrusted the mana required for its upkeep to Chaldea in order to maintain the bond across distances. This was Morgan Le Fay from this human history. Yet the one who appeared was Artoria. And not just any version, but a Lancer. Shiomi didn't even need to ask. One look at the long spear told him it was another of the legendary relics from Arthurian lore. Holy Spear Rong Ominiad. But the black armor cloaking her figure reminded him all too much of the Dark King of Knights who had appeared in Singularity F. Could there be something wrong with this singularity? Something that corrupted the servants summoned here? Shiomi didn't have time to ponder it. The entire point of summoning a servant was to break the overwhelming enemy numbers and avoid getting dragged into a drawn-out battle. He even deliberately ignored the sound of a pen snapping in half from the communicator on the other end. Can I assume you're an ally, Lancer? No. Artoria. Shiomi stepped forward and addressed the mounted knight. Artoria looked down coldly at the mechanical soldiers who had survived the earlier charge and were closing in again. There's no need to ask. You summoned me. That makes you my master. Give me your orders. Then fight, Lancer. Shiomi ordered, clenching his fist. At his command, Artoria charged forward on her steed like a heavy war chariot, crashing into the helter-skelters. The iron wall they formed crumbled like paper before the storm her lance unleashed. Mordred, who had been locked in a melee with the machines, smashed one apart just as a familiar gust swept through. She kicked away the nearest unit and leapt back, taking advantage of the sudden shift in attention. Father. The surge of mana that had descended from the sky was unmistakably familiar. Mordred hadn't expected it to be her father. Though cloaked in dark armor, that silhouette could belong to no one else. What's going on? Why is father here? She demanded. No idea. Maybe because you're here, it affected the emergency summons somehow, Shiomi said casually as he dashed toward a mechanical soldier. Placing his palm on its head, a current surged out, forming a blade of electricity that cleaved the machine apart with razor-smooth precision. Seriously? Mordred muttered. Her emotions were complicated. Part irritation, part of bubbling joy at fighting alongside her father again. Forget that. What about Mr. Jekyll? He's not dead, is he? Sakura called out, taking the chance to check on the apartment. Mordred paused. Right. What about that Bin Sprout? Don't tell me he got himself killed. Without waiting for an answer, she leapt up the outer wall to the 4th floor and looked down. There, just 5 or 6 meters from where Artoria stood, Jekyll was at the apartment entrance, desperately fending off a mechanical soldier with a small knife. He looked wild, almost unrecognizable. The leader of the enemy forces swung its hammer down. But Jekyll, frail as he seemed, somehow caught the blow and let out a crazed roar. He was drenched in blood. It didn't look good. Mordred didn't know how a human had lasted this long, but she wasn't about to leave him to die. She kicked off the wall, dropped beside him, and sliced through the machine going for his back. Hey! Bin Sprout. If you're still breathing, get out of here. Leave the rest to us. Huh? Who the hell are you? Jekyll's voice had none of its usual composure. Only raw aggression. Mordred frowned. Something was off, but there was no time to ask questions. She grabbed his arm. Shut up. Keep this up and you'll die. Before he could protest, she hurled him in the direction of Shiomi and Sakura. Catch him, master. In the chaos of steam and grinding metal, there was no sound of someone hitting the ground. Got him, Saber. Sakura's voice echoed through mental communication. She used wind magecraft to create a cushion of air, allowing Jekyll to land safely. Nice. Mordred turned back and released a blast of mana, swinging her sword to intercept the massive mechanical servant's next strike. What the hell are you supposed to be? She demanded. This body. Is made of delusion and dream, a deep mechanical voice replied, the meaning obscure. But the mechanical servant seemed to sense the tide had turned. A new servant had arrived. The helter-skelter forces would soon be wiped out. Then, a wave of scorching steam rolled out, blinding and oppressive, forcing Mordred to retreat. The battlefield conditions have deteriorated. Annihilation mission deemed unfeasible. Initiating retreat, declared the mechanical servant. With a massive blast of steam, its colossal frame surged upward, lifting off the ground. What the hell? Mordred shielded her face with one arm, forcing one eye open just in time to see the mechanical servant abandoning the battlefield, leaving the helter-skelters behind. On the other side, Artoria saw it too. She tugged sharply on the reins. Her steed reared and leapt into the air as she raised her lance. Winds, sweep it all away. Invisible air. Even as a lancer, with no need to conceal her identity or weapon, the wind-based noble phantasm invisible air remained with her. Unlike the focused, piercing version used in her saber form, this version allowed her to rapidly unleash a wide-range attack with minimal mana cost. The mechanical servant at the center of the storm threw its full strength into resisting. Though it was struck directly, it wasn't knocked down. Instead, it used the impact to vanish into the dense fog, leaving only the hissing echo of steam-powered machines behind. Mordred, watching from a safe distance, clicked her tongue in frustration. The enemy's retreat had been swift and clean. She clung to the apartment's outer wall and glanced down. The remaining helter-skelters had been completely torn apart by the blast from invisible air. Those few still moving were swiftly dealt with by Shiomi and Sakura. TCH. What a letdown. Jekyll, still in his altered state, clicked his tongue before closing his eyes. When he opened them again, he let out a low groan of pain. Everyone. You made it back. I wasn't sure you would, so I resorted to desperate measure. His voice and demeanor had returned to the refined and gentle tone they were familiar with. And with that, he collapsed in the middle of the street. Chapter 235. Although Henry Jekyll managed to fight off the mechanical soldiers, he was badly wounded. If Shiomi and the others had arrived any later, he would have ended up like Dr. Frankenstein. Shiomi suspected that Jekyll's aggressive, manic behavior was due to the potion he created. Just like in the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Which allowed him to switch to a combat-oriented second personality. Though Jekyll wasn't the combative type, Shiomi's healing eased his physical injuries. However, his mental fatigue could only be cured with rest. Even after he was out of immediate danger, he remained unconscious. After hearing Shiomi's explanation, Mordred finally let out a sigh of relief. If the people who had taken her and had died because she was away, she wouldn't have been able to rest easy even back at the Throne of Heroes. But that only brought up the next issue. After the battle, Artoria dismounted and followed the group into the apartment. She removed her helmet and sat silently on the couch, eyes closed, resting. She didn't greet Mordred or question Shiomi. As a result, the room felt far from relaxed. Mordred even chose the room diagonally opposite Artoria, the farthest spot from her. Artoria Pendragon. Shiomi muttered as he connected to Morgan. As expected of my husband. Out of all the countless servants, you just had to summon Artoria, Morgan teased casually. I was going to ask you the same thing. Shiomi sighed. Thankfully, Morgan didn't press further. Still, the sly smirk she projected on screen sent chills down Shiomi's spine. So, you're the one supporting the master. Artoria gave Morgan a cool glance but didn't comment further. If you're dissatisfied, feel free to leave. My husband will simply summon someone else, Morgan replied sharply. Ahem. Shiomi quickly stepped in to diffuse the tension. So, should I explain the current situation to you, King of Knights? I'm neither king nor knight right now. Just call me by name, Artoria said, rejecting the title. I was aware of the singularity's emergence when I was summoned, but all I knew was that I was here to help you fix it. Shiomi gave a slight nod. But why? Did you turn out like this? Is there something wrong with this singularity? Did it corrupt you the moment you arrived? And not just that. He noticed this Artoria didn't recognize him like the one from Singularity F. Her build was also different. Most notably, her height was similar to Morgan's. And the size beneath her breastplate was unmistakable. This was simply my own decision. If I didn't. Artoria abruptly stopped, realizing it was irrelevant. Sakura looked puzzled. Now I'm even more curious. Saber, do you know why? How would I know that? Mordred shook her head. She certainly recognized the holy spear that had killed her. But her father had never looked like this when alive. Even if you don't want to say it, I know, Morgan interjected. The reason you're a lancer is because you chose the holy spear over the holy sword during your lifetime. Mordred froze. Then why did father rarely use the spear back then? It's simple, Morgan said. If she kept using the holy spear, Her physical growth would no longer be suppressed. But in doing so, she'd gradually be consumed by the spear's power. Until she became the goddess Rong-O-Minyad. Her tone grew almost gleeful. But no matter the path, Artoria died in the 10th year of her reign, so that outcome never came to pass. Mordred felt deeply unsettled and fell silent. So this form of Artoria's is to suppress the spear's influence? Shiomi asked. Exactly. Once godhood takes over, your very nature changes. You might even do things you never would have otherwise. That's why she chose to alter herself. Using the taint of black mud to counter the spear's corruption, degrading herself into something like the Wild Hunt. So that's why she said she's not a king or a knight. Shiomi murmured. She really was the same Artoria after all. That streak of self-destructiveness hadn't changed at all. Then it hit him. Why he had summoned Artoria. First, in a past Holy Grail war, the King of Knights had entrusted him with the true name of Avalon, the ever-distant Utopia. Second, Mordred was present, which meant that even without a holy relic, he was linked to the Knights of the Round Table. And third, was the wand that Cuchulainn had given him. Shiomi was certain it was a divine artifact from the Age of Gods. Something Odin had passed on to him through Cuchulainn for some unknown purpose. Its true power remained sealed. But since it came from Odin, it had to be tied to him. In Norse mythology, Odin was known for episodes of madness and is even believed to be the origin of the Wild Hunt legend that spread across Europe. With those three factors combined, Artoria Pendragon answering his call was inevitable. In any case, this gives us a solid boost in combat power, Shiomi said. The mastermind behind this singularity has already started moving. There's no guarantee they won't attack again. Or worse, start tracking down other stray, uncontracted servants to either recruit or eliminate, just to stop us from getting stronger. It doesn't matter. I'll assist you until the singularity is completely repaired, Artoria replied. Morgan let out a quiet sigh. I may not be thrilled about it, but she is dependable. Having King Arthur as an ally to help fix the singularity. Saber, you're okay with that, right? Sakura asked, glancing toward Mordred by the fireplace. Why are you asking me? You're the masters here. Mordred snapped, bristling like a cat whose tail had just been stepped on. So? Sakura asked with a bright smile. Do whatever you want. Mordred grumbled, scratching at her hair. Ugh, it's so stuffy in here. I'm going to step outside for some air. And stand watch while I'm at it. With that, she marched out of the room with a weird, exaggerated gait. Artoria never once looked in Mordred's direction the entire time. Shiomi couldn't help but feel a twinge of emotion. There really are parent-child relationships this complicated in the world. My husband, our plan to head to the clock tower will have to be delayed by a day, Morgan said. Your vitals are all low. It's likely the aftermath of the battle earlier. Alright. Let's go with that then. Shiomi, who'd originally thought 2 hours of rest would be enough to get moving again, had no choice but to go along. Chapter 236, Shiomi stirred from his nap, feeling a gaze locked onto him. A blanket was draped over him. Most likely Sakur's doing. Through the apartment window, the streets of London remained cloaked in magical fog. Though a temporary barrier had been set up, Shiomi couldn't be sure when the mastermind behind the singularity might strike. That's why he'd chosen to rest by the fireplace in the living room. So he could react the moment danger arrived. He lightly pressed a hand to his head to clear the post-sleep sluggishness and saw Artoria sitting on the armrest of a nearby single-seater sofa. She was staring directly at him. Something wrong? Did you spot an enemy? Shiomi perked up immediately, activating his magic circuits and letting mana flow through his body to shake off the lingering fatigue. No. I can hear mechanical soldiers in the city, but they're still at a distance, Artoria replied coolly. I was simply watching you, Master. He instinctively leaned away toward the opposite armrest, eyeing her warily. Me? What's there to watch? You're rather interesting, Artoria said flatly. Seeing you gives me the impression of how young you are. It's just temporal fixation, nothing worth fussing over, Shiomi said, resting his chin on one hand. That's fairly common in the world of magi. You should know that. If we're talking actual age, I'm actually... Before he could finish, Artoria suddenly stood from the armrest and stepped in close. Placing her hands on the armrest and backrest, she easily boxed Shiomi in. Her golden eyes locked onto his. But your case is a little different. To be direct, it's very similar to the effect of the Holy Sword. The Holy Sword? Shiomi blinked in surprise. He was well aware that Excalibur could halt the wielder's physical growth. He'd seen the effect firsthand in Artoria Pendragon. But this Artoria was implying that what affected him wasn't just a typical Magus-level fixation. It's only an intuitive theory, Artoria continued, her emotionless golden gaze seeming to pierce into the depths of Shiomi's soul. as if scrutinizing his very being. But I sense a similar aura from you, Master. Simply put, you're not an ordinary human. I'm a magus. Shiomi had never been this physically close to Artoria before. Being cornered and examined so intensely left him uncomfortable enough to avert his eyes. Especially now that she'd removed most of her armor to conserve mana. Certain prominent features were far too close. He was almost afraid to breathe for fear of being disrespectful. Of course, Artoria didn't seem to notice such details and simply continued the conversation. You're not an ordinary human, and I don't just mean because you're a magus. Your body houses mysteries from the Age of Gods. Shiomi let out a sigh, a half-smile tugging at his lips. So this really was the same Artoria as before. I thought you were going to say something dramatic. You know, I was trained by the Queen of the Land of Shadows. Artoria said nothing in response. Shiomi could answer all her questions, but deep down, his instincts told him his explanations still lacked something essential. That's why Artoria continued to stare at him like that. Forget it. In my current state, I can't unravel the answer. If Master. Artoria seemed on the verge of saying something more, but Morgan's voice cut in. Artoria, how long do you plan to cling to my husband? Morgan's frown was clear on the projection screen, her displeasure written all over her face. Oh? The woman who toyed with countless men and ultimately destroyed my country is now obsessed with one man? Up until a moment ago, Artoria had been calm and composed. Now, her tone was dripping with mockery. A far cry from the King of Knights Shiomi knew. So this is what alter really means. Even the personality is different. Shiomi silently remarked. She's not the Morgan you knew, he said, trying to pull back, but Artoria's gauntleted fingers were already lightly touching his cheek, their cold touch sending a shiver through him. I knew from the moment I saw you, Artoria said with a mysterious smile. She glanced sideways at Morgan, part provocation, part mockery. Right now, I'm Master's servant. With Chaldea's tech, you can't perform repeated spiritron transfers to the same singularity, can you? What are you implying? Morgan's elegant brows twitched. Artoria smiled and leaned even closer, her hand still trailing along Shiomi's face. Isn't it obvious? Shiomi's heart was pounding in his throat. He was sure Artoria didn't necessarily have feelings for him. But she definitely had feelings when it came to Morgan. That's why she'd use this sort of act to mock her, even knowing they weren't the same person. Only a King of Knights in this state could pull something like this so effortlessly. Speaking of which, it should be nighttime in Chaldea by now, right? Shiomi quickly changed the subject. I'm on duty in the control room tonight. Everyone else has gone to rest. Morgan smiled sweetly. The kind of smile that always spelled trouble for Shiomi. To think I'd get to witness this. Well worth the watch. Shiomi was at a loss for words. He considered himself decent at talking his way out of things, but the way this conversation was going made it feel like he'd been caught in some kind of affair. Maybe he should swap Artoria out for his teacher instead. That might cut down Morgan's complaints. Maybe? Well then. Before he could finish, Artoria pressed a button on his hand, ending the call. What? Shiomi finally cracked, shrieking as he flailed on the couch, toppling it and himself to the floor. He scrambled to reconnect the call, and Morgan's image reappeared. This time, she was leaning back, chin resting casually on one hand. It was a one-way visual feed, yet she looked like she could see everything. Honestly, my husband. You're losing your cool over something this trivial. How do you expect to save the planet like that? Huh? You're not mad anymore? Artoria's little tricks don't amount to much. Hardly worth a smirk, Morgan said flatly. Or maybe you're just putting on an act, Artoria shot back without mercy. It's not about good or bad. Even tainted by black mud, she's still Artoria. That's what being an alter means, Morgan sneered. At least in her case. You two actually don't get along that badly, do you? Shiomi muttered. Absolutely not. Both of them denied it in unison. Chapter 237. The next day, Shiomi and his group set out for the clock tower. Just as they had predicted, the clock tower had been completely annihilated. The Magi must have put up a desperate fight before being wiped out along with the structure itself. Even just standing on the ruins, Shiomi could sense lingering traces of all kinds of magical energy. Remnants left behind by the defeated Magi. Not a single thing left, huh? Mordred muttered, kicking over a crumbling pillar as she searched for any possible entrance. If this era's clock tower is built exactly like it was in ours, then there's no way in, Sakura said with a helpless shake of her head. The attackers clearly knew the clock tower inside and out. They made sure to erase everything. What now, Master? Artoria asked, turning to Shiomi. Pulled from his thoughts, Shiomi replied, we came to confirm the damage. It's obvious the Magi here fought to the end. They went down with the surface. But only the surface. The real value of the clock tower lay underground. To put it simply, the entire structure was built atop the spiritual tomb of Albion. The surface was just the terminal of a much larger production system. That's why most of the important assets of the Mages Association were hidden below ground, including the data Shiomi was after. For example, the books in the surface-level library were mostly copies or relatively unimportant. Is there something specific you're concerned about? Artoria asked again. Not exactly. I'm just thinking. For the place to fall this easily, what's the Wizard Marshal even doing? Does he not think it's worth intervening? Shiomi was referring to the second magician. In their original timeline, that magician had already stepped down from the Wizard Marshal position in 2015, handing it over to the head of the Lorelei family. But in this era, he still held that post. Maybe he never intended to step in, Morgan's voice chimed in. After all, Chaldea already has a magus like my husband. Maybe the old man really did get taken out, Shiomi muttered, though he didn't seriously believe it. He waved to Sakura and Mordred, signaling for them to move on. Their next destination was another secret entrance to the clock tower. This one hidden beneath the British Museum. On the way there, Shiomi noticed Sakura yawning and asked, "What's wrong? Didn't sleep well last night?" "No, it's nothing." Sakura quickly shook her head, her face a little red, like she'd witnessed something she wasn't supposed to. "If you're too tired, take Mordred back to the base. Artoria and I can handle the rest of the investigation," Shiomi offered. "No need, really." Sakura waved her hand to brush off the concern. Mordred barged in from the side and jabbed Shiomi with her armored elbow. "You've got some nerve saying that. You and my father and mother were making such a racket last night, even an assassin wouldn't have missed it." Shiomi froze in place. "So what the hell were you doing? Some kind of love triangle?" Mordred growled, clearly irritated. Shiomi sighed in exasperation. "If anything, it's Artoria's fault." "What about my father?" Mordred glared at him, looking ready to throw down if he dared say a single bad word. Shiomi thought to himself, wait, weren't your relationships strained? Weren't you at each other's throats? Could being summoned as a servant actually help resolve emotional baggage? No, forget it. My bad. Shiomi waved his hand, eager to end the conversation. Getting into a fight over this would just be a waste. Completely unnecessary. You know, for someone who usually acts pretty steady, why do you keep doing the kind of crap only pretty boys get away with? Mordred grumbled, clearly annoyed by Shiomi's flirtatious tendencies. As far as she could tell, he was messing around with both her mother and her father. To outsiders, it might seem like no big deal. But for Mordred, it hit a nerve. In the blink of an eye, it made her relationship with Shiomi and with Sakura way more complicated. If she spent even 2 more minutes thinking about it, her brain and her magic circuits would probably go up in flames together. Who's doing anything like that? Shiomi raised his voice and smacked his chest. I've got a clear conscience, all right? Maybe he used too much force. After the second hit, he suddenly choked and coughed a few times. Mordred immediately gave him a look of pity and let out a disgusted duck. At that moment, a black steed with a white mane appeared beside Shiomi, materializing into form. You're not looking well. Hop on, master. Lamrai can carry too. Artoria, already mounted on the horse, reached out a hand to him like a prince on a white steed. Though in this case, it was more like a black one. Lancer. Could you stop making things even more complicated? Shiomi shouted, giving Lamrai a sharp smack on the hindquarters in an attempt to shoo both Artoria and the horse away. But Lamrai, as one of King Arthur's treasured mounts, didn't flinch in the slightest. Seeing his attempt fail, Shiomi gave a defeated wave to hide his embarrassment and quickly changed the subject. Anyway, doesn't it feel even more deserted out here than yesterday? Based on the scanner readings, the mana concentration in the air has grown even thicker than before. If an ordinary person breathes it in, they'd probably fall unconscious. Prolonged exposure would be like breathing pure oxygen too long. The body can't handle it and eventually dies. This time, it was Romani speaking, taking over the comms to relay Chaldea's analysis. Real deal magic fog, huh? For magi like them, the effects were negligible. But for anyone without magical aptitude, it was lethal. And from the time they left for the clock tower up until now, neither Paracelsus nor the mechanical servant, or anyone else, had shown themselves. Just as Shiomi was trying to guess the enemy's next move, Artoria, who was riding slightly ahead, suddenly came to a halt. Lamrai snorted sharply in warning. Shiomi looked up. Blocking their path on the way to the museum was a formation of mechanical soldiers. They were just one street away from their destination. Shiomi was certain now. The enemy had predicted their route and was here to intercept. It's you again. If you're going to block the road, Then state your name, Artoria said, leveling her holy spear from horseback toward the mechanical servant. This is our king's command. We have no choice. A voice, unfamiliar and male, rang out. A pale-skinned man with wavy blue hair stepped into view. At his side appeared Paracelsus, still speaking in his trademark melancholy tone. Our plans have been completely disrupted. Now we have no choice but to make amends. Chapter 238, At the Singularity. Shiomi wouldn't have been surprised if enemies had appeared at any moment. They were mentally prepared for that. But when Paracelsus and his group blocked their path to the museum, flanked by helter-skelters and artificial life forms, and claimed they were atoning for their sins to their king, even Shiomi was taken aback. King? Shiomi stood beside Artoria's horse, eyeing the blue-haired man at the front of the group. As expected, the three of them weren't the real masterminds. Just underlings responsible for creating the singularity and burning away human order. But the true mastermind was someone they referred to as king. His mind raced through the many renowned kings among the heroic spirits, then shifted his gaze toward Artoria. A new hypothesis surfaced. If Artoria had responded to the summons not just for the usual reasons, but because she had ties to the mastermind behind the singularity. The first name that came to mind was the usurper king, Votigen. According to legends he'd read at the Mages Association, Votigen's power once eclipsed the radiance of the holy swords of both King Arthur and Gawain, forcing Arthur to bring out the holy spear and slay him. But even if Votigen was the embodiment of Britannia itself, could he really have orchestrated a catastrophe on the scale of incinerating human history? You don't need to know that, the blue-haired man sneered. As long as we kill all of you from Chaldea here, our king won't punish us for failing. Pulled from his thoughts, Shiomi looked up at the man again. You're? There was something oddly familiar about him. Like someone he'd seen before but couldn't fully recall. I am Makiri Zoljan, the one leading the London Demonic Fog Project, the man introduced himself, then burst into a low, sinister laugh. Or perhaps it's more convenient for you if I say Zkanmentu? The moment he heard the name, Shiomi knew who he was dealing with. But Makiri's next word stunned him even more. And something clicked. No wonder the Matu family vanished after the Fifth Holy Grail War. Shiomi let out a knowing chuckle. The Mages Association couldn't trace a single lead after that. Who would have thought? You actually managed to rejuvenate yourself, Matu. That body was already too decrepit to be of any use. And you outsider magus kept interfering with our rituals, Makiri spat with disdain. I gave up on the Holy Grail and the Matu family long ago. Only an idiot like Shinji would have insisted on joining. He showed no sympathy for his descendants. Instead, his eyes turned toward Sakura. If you hadn't taken that little girl away from the Tasaka family back then. Sakura stiffened, clutching her wand as she moved closer to Shiomi. As an adult, she'd heard from Shiomi that when Tokiomi Tasaka was struggling to decide Sakura's future, both Shiomi and the Matu family had shown interest. In the end, Tokiomi chose Shiomi because of his status and connections at the clock tower. If he hadn't. Just thinking about the inhuman wreck that was Shinji Mata made Sakura shudder at what might have been. Makiri Zoljan. Shiomi reached out, shielding Sakura behind him as a surge of fury rose within. He couldn't forgive anyone who looked at his family like they were some kind of contagion. You've finally regained your youth, and you're already looking to die? Makiri remained expressionless. This body is a gift from our king. Naturally, I must offer everything for his great cause. Life and death are no longer concerns. Still, I didn't expect that, just as Paracelsus said, evil would inevitably be obstructed by those who walk the path of good. Shiomi didn't know what Makiri had been through, but he could tell. This man fully understood the evil he committed and still pressed forward without hesitation. Just as our king burned through human history in pursuit of his grand vision, the counterforce will never sit back and allow such things to happen. For the sake of humanity, a messiah will inevitably rise to oppose us, Paracelsus said, his tone melancholic as he spoke his cryptic philosophy. That's what destiny is. Shiomi locked eyes with Makiri's group, his gaze ice cold. P and Dem have already shown up. That means the remaining B. Is that mechanical servant over there, right? My name is Charles Babbage, one who has devoted everything to the glorious steam world, the mechanical servant introduced himself in a flat, emotionless voice. So all three bastards who caused the demonic fog are here. Mordred knocked her sword against her shoulder armor. And they even brought a whole army. Trying to wipe us out in one go, huh? Artoria, unusually, picked up where Mordred left off. Then the question is, which side's getting wiped out? Mordred blinked, then broke into a fierce grin. Good point. Looks like there's no avoiding it now, Makiri said with mock regret, though it was clear he had planned for this from the start. Shiomi gripped his magic wand. With Mordred and Artoria handling the front line, he intended to push Odin's wand further. To see how much it could really do. Sakura, Don't pay any attention to that guy. Stay by my side. He squeezed her hand and encouraged her. I'm here. You'll be fine. I understand. I've known that for a long time, Dad. Sakura clasped his hand firmly, fully activating her magic circuits to unleash the maximum amount of mana. No signal marked the start of the battle. The army of helter-skelters and artificial life forms surged toward them like a tidal wave, intent on crushing them. If they could be crushed, that is. With two massive bursts of magical energy, the King of Knights and the Rebel Knight shot into the enemy ranks like twin comets. Red and black. Tearing through the horde from the front, toppling and ripping apart mechanical soldiers and artificial life forms alike. The advancing enemy line faltered. But this wasn't going to be a simple hack-and-slash fight. Makiri's group launched their own offensive. You remember the Grand Magecraft spell I taught you, right? Shiomi asked with a grin. I'm not an idiot. Of course I remember everything. Then sync your mana frequency with mine. We'll strike together and cover Lancer and Saber. Shiomi raised his voice. The two wands crossed, and a rune Magecraft array bloomed beneath their feet, centered around them. Mana surged from the glowing runes, streaming forward and held within its bounds. Together, they chanted the same incantation, raising their wands toward the sky. Meteor Judgment. Chapter 239, Astromancy. Typically, aside from Animasphere, who oversees the Department of Astromancy, only those who studied under that department have true mastery of it. Other magus might grasp the general theory, but without years of dedicated study, they're unlikely to show any practical results in combat. This has always been one of the shortcomings Shiomi sees in modern magecraft. In contrast, rituals constructed from primordial runes can bypass the boundaries of modern classifications, allowing the caster to achieve their desired miracles. But with the age of gods long gone, finding another magus like him is nearly impossible. That's why Shiomi hides the nature of his magecraft under the guise of conventional types, pushing them to their utmost limits. Resulting in the instantaneous grand magecrafts he takes pride in. Extraordinary circumstances call for extraordinary methods. With this singularity concealing too many secrets. And Chaldea cut off from the outside world. This was the only opportunity to access records from the Mages Association. Eliminating the enemy as swiftly as possible was the ideal course of action. Using unexpected astromancy against Makiri and his group was the perfect strategy. Makiri's eyes widened at the sight of meteors falling from the sky. He knew well that Animasphere's astromancy required lengthy preparations for spells of this magnitude. And yet here was a magus with no apparent background or reputation achieving the same feat. There was no time to dwell on it. Paracelsus and Babbage, acting as servants, took the lead in intercepting the incoming meteors. Dimension of Steam. Sword of Paracelsus. The two noble phantasms activated in succession, shattering the meteors that could have crushed them. The fragments scattered, veered off course, and rained down on the ruins of the museum and the surrounding streets and buildings. But those not intercepted struck the army of chaotic machine soldiers and artificial life forms, finishing off the scattered forces already disoriented by Mordred and Artoria's assault. Seriously. If you were planning to unleash something like that, a little warning would have been nice. You almost crushed me and father with it. Mordred jumped back in front of Shiomi and the others, complaining with a frustrated grin. Relax. As long as you're not an enemy, you won't get hit, Shiomi replied. With your instincts, dodging meteors shouldn't be hard. Master's magecraft is truly something else. Not even Merlin is good with this type of spell, said Artoria as she skewered a mechanical soldier with her spear, then hurled its impaled body at another one like a projectile. Shiomi sighed. I heard the Magus of Flowers is notorious for slacking off, but he won't even bother with this kind of magecraft? That bastard's more of a support type than a frontline fighter, Mordred muttered as she kicked away another incoming artificial life form. After the meteor shower, Shiomi and Sakura lowered their wands. That single grand magecraft wiped out more than half of the enemy's cannon fodder, drastically reducing both sides' combat power. But crucially, Makiri and his two companions remained unscathed. Paracelsus began walking down the road, raising the magical sword in his hand. A barrage of elemental spells flew out one after another. Mixed in with the advancing mechanical soldiers, these constructs had no emotions or fear. Even if they were the last ones left, they would still charge forward as ordered. That was what made this army so troublesome. If they had been regular soldiers, morale would have started to falter after just 10% casualties. At 30%, the entire force would be on the verge of collapse. That guy can cast magecraft without chanting? Relying on her magic resistance to withstand the spell, Mordred charged toward Paracelsus, cutting through like it was nothing. But Babbage suddenly dropped from above, using sheer brute force to pin her down for the moment. But they still had Artoria on their side. If the enemy hadn't lost Jack the Ripper and Mephistopheles earlier, they wouldn't be this overwhelmed. Suddenly, from the surrounding magical fog, a swarm of blade-wing insects burst forth. Sakura had just finished casting the astromancy magecraft alongside him and needed a moment to recover. Shiomi raised his hand, and flames rose into a wall, enclosing the two of them. The blade-wing insects disintegrated into ash the moment they struck the fiery barrier. Makiri, I've had enough of your magecraft. Shiomi slowly floated off the ground, hovering midair as his wand traced a sharp, fluid arc before him. Just then, Mordred felt the stone-paved road beneath her feet begin to quake. Like an earthquake was hitting. Moments later, countless vines tore through the ground, snaking out to wrap around every mechanical soldier and artificial life form within reach. They avoided Mordred and Artoria's mounts with pinpoint precision. In an instant, the road turned into a field overrun with vines. Even Babbage, who had been about to attack Mordred again, was caught. His limbs pulled tight by the relentless vines, completely immobilized. Lancer. Noble Phantasm. Shiomi commanded. Across the flames, Sakura gave Mordred a nod. I am no king, but I follow in the king's path. Mordred murmured, then raised her long sword and shouted the true name of her noble phantasm. Clarent Blood Arthur, rebellion against my beautiful father. At the sound of the name, Artoria glanced toward her, then swept aside the enemies in her path. The holy spear in her hand began to spin, whipping up a fierce wind. Take this. 13 fangs. Wrong Omniad, the lance that shines to the end of the world. From two opposite directions, the two noble phantasms converged, striking directly at Babbage and Paracelsus. With their movement restricted, neither of them had time to activate a second noble phantasm. At last, the two surging powers collided right at Makiri Zul'jin's position, erupting in a violent explosion. The two waves of magical energy clashed as if battling for dominance. Shiomi watched as the blade-wing insects dwindled around him, vanishing one by one. Only when they were gone did he dismiss the wall of fire shielding Sakura. Did that finish them? Sakura stepped forward, eyes scanning the battlefield anxiously. The remaining mechanical soldiers and artificial life forms, swept up by the noble phantasms, had been reduced to ash. Heavy smoke and dense magical fog swirled together, obscuring the scene. Then, a massive black silhouette slowly emerged from the haze, radiating a sense of dread. I didn't think you'd be so troublesome. It seems I'll have to call on my king's power to finish you, Makiri's voice echoed, faint and distant. One of the 72 demon gods. Demon god Barbados. This is the embodiment of my evil. As the dust cleared, what stood in the fog was no longer Makiri, but a towering column of flesh covered in countless ominous, staring eyes. My king saw through my evil. Saw the grotesque darkness within my heart that once sought to save humanity. With this ultimate ugliness. Disappear. Just like I once was, you who wear the mask of righteousness. Chapter 240, Demon God Barbados? Shiomi stared at the ominous, pillar-like figure, letting out a rare gasp. That demon god. Could it be? After releasing her noble phantasm and retreating to her master's side, Artoria couldn't help but ask aloud. Throughout the long span of human history, few beings have ever been called demon gods. The most well-known are the 72 demon gods under King Solomon's command. Among them, Barbados is the 8th. A familiar summon through the summoning magecraft created by Solomon, the king of magecraft. Shiomi watched as the form of the demon god pillar slowly stabilized. Makiri Zul'jin turned into a demon god. No, more accurately, into a demon god pillar. Something about the London singularity now felt deeply off. 10 years ago, during the Holy Grail War, Shiomi had fought alongside Morgan against the king of magecraft and witnessed the demon gods he summoned. Archer, poet, knight, warrior. Each demon god that appeared on the battlefield and was driven back by Shiomi had a different form. Morgan had said those were not their true appearances. That made it hard for Shiomi to accept that the original form of the 72 demon gods would be this. What Makiri Zul'jin had become. A palpable aura of dread and chaos radiated outward. But this wasn't the time or place to ponder further, nor could he spare the attention to ask Ramani for answers. He could already feel the gaze of the demon god pillar's countless eyes focusing on him. A chill ran down the back of his neck. Instinctively, he dodged to the right. But he was half a step too late. A beam of magical energy, powerful enough to obliterate his head, grazed past, leaving a fine line across his left cheek. So fast. Shiomi brushed his fingers against the wound as he kept his eyes on the demon god pillar's movements. Just its gaze. Those many eyes. Was enough to launch an attack across dozens of meters. It was clear Makiri had only just transformed and hadn't yet fully adapted to his new form or powers. Otherwise, that surprise attack just now could have blown Shiomi's head clean off. He lowered his hand from the wound, which was already gone. With a sweep of his staff, he erected a defensive barrier. Sakura, you and Mordred hold the line. Lancer and I will probe Barbados' strength." With that, Shiomi darted forward. Just as the spot he'd been floating at moments earlier exploded. Thanks to the barrier, Sakura on the ground remained unharmed. Makiri, or rather, Barbados, had clearly identified Shiomi as the most dangerous threat. The blood-red eyes along his pillar twisted and tracked Shiomi's every move with terrifying precision, all focused solely on him. Shiomi landed and sprinted across the ground, weaving through scorched thorns and ashes. His speed increased rapidly, explosions blooming in his wake. Even with dozens of eyes tracking him with no blind spots, Barbados couldn't keep up. Couldn't lock onto him long enough to strike. And besides, there was another servant galloping across the battlefield. Just as Barbados' full attention was locked on Shiomi, Artoria charged in on horseback, appearing right in front of him. Smash it! The spinning black holy spear struck at the demon god pillar's eye, but was stopped by a shield formed from mana. Sparks burst out in a flurry, unable to reach the detestable red pupil. The demon god pillar's body was massive. Just one of its eyes was the size of 2 or 3 people. Its towering form loomed like a colossal pillar holding up the sky, like a golden beam bridging the seas. Barbados immediately shifted targets. All of its eyes flared with light, launching a barrage of attacks at Artoria. Even with her resistance to magical energy, taking the brunt of that assault sent her and her warhorse flying. They crashed to the ground and rolled several times before coming to a stop. But they were heroic spirits. Both the servant and her steed. So this level of attack wasn't enough to be fatal. Artoria pulled her horse up, swung herself back into the saddle, and raised her spear, searching for her next opening to strike. Letting a servant like her get in close was a dangerous mistake. Barbados launched another wave of attacks. "Where are you looking, Makiri Zul'jin?" Shiomi's voice rang out. Seeing Barbados turn its attention back, Shiomi gave a mocking smile. "Even if you've become something inhuman, your mind's still human. Can't split your focus and handle 2 tough enemies at once, can you?" As he spoke, the runes glowing at the tip of his staff began to spin, locking into place. Great Ice Age. From the base up, Barbados' massive body began to freeze. Its writhing mass grew sluggish. No matter how violently it shattered the ice, more surged up in the next instant, climbing faster and faster. One of the enormous eyes near the front froze just as it lit up, unable to fire its mana beam. The plan was to first restrain its movements, then use command spells to boost the noble phantasms of Artoria and Mordred. Even if it couldn't be destroyed in one blow, the damage should be irreparable. After that, Shiomi raised his hand, ready to use a command spell, when a deep rumble shook the ground beneath him. Just like the vines he had summoned earlier, jet-black tentacles, matching the texture of the demon god pillar's surface, burst forth from the fractured earth. It was the same malevolent aura that had struck when Artoria was ambushed before the Greater Grail in Fuiuki. Shiomi rolled aside to avoid the first strike, then launched a counterattack, cutting down and shattering the tentacles that came too close. But more and thicker tendrils kept emerging. Some of them kept harassing Shiomi and blocking Artoria's path, while others coiled tightly around Barbados' body. The magical ice began to crack. "You were aiming for that spot from the start?" Shiomi raised his wand again to cast another spell, but the relentless tentacles kept interfering, diverting his ice magic to strike them instead. A massive fireball streaked in and slammed into the tentacles in front of Shiomi. The black tendrils burst into flames, twisting and convulsing before crumbling into ash. Landing on the ground, Shiomi looked up and saw Sakura, staff in hand, her gaze steady and resolute. This battlefield wasn't just him and Lancer. Sakura and Saber were here too. "Sakura, cover me." The ice on Barbados' body had completely shattered. The ominous red eyes flared to life again, and over a dozen beams of mana shot out like arrows, slicing through streets and buildings, converging on Shiomi's position. Makiri seemed eager to end things quickly, aiming to take Shiomi down. As long as Artoria couldn't reach Barbados' body, the focus of the attack would stay on him. Ordinarily, you deal with what's manageable first, then move on to the tougher threats. Reversing that order risks letting an otherwise minor enemy become a serious problem. Could it be? A hint of realization flickered through Shiomi's mind. Chapter 241, During the Fifth Holy Grail War, Shiomi had fought against several of Solomon's demon gods. Though they had taken on forms resembling those described in legend, each one possessed combat strength comparable to a standard servant. If not for the inherent limitations of the Fuiuki Grail War ritual, which prevented all 72 demon gods from manifesting at once and unleashing their full might, the mere appearance of all of them would have meant certain death for both Shiomi and Morgan. The form Makiri Zul'jin had taken as Barbados now displayed strength that surpassed even top-tier servants like Artoria. But Shiomi had quickly identified Barbados' biggest flaw. Makiri, as the foundation of the demon god pillar, had yet to fully adapt. His control over power was crude and reliant on brute force. Worse, despite being a seasoned magus, Makiri was showing signs of impatience and recklessness. An alarming departure from what should have been calculated control. Even with Artoria, Mordred, and Sakura keeping up the pressure, as long as they didn't land a serious blow, Barbados' focus remained locked on Shiomi. As the battle wore on, Shiomi grew more and more certain of this. After sidestepping another strike and summoning his crimson spear to slice through the oncoming tentacles, Shiomi leaned on the weapon and pointed his staff at Barbados. Given the difference in size, the gesture looked absurd. Like Don Quixote challenging a windmill. Barbados. No, Makiri Zul'jin. You're this desperate to take me out. There's only one reason I can think of. The moment he spoke, all those crimson eyes zeroed in on him. Light flared, and the ground he'd stood on was blasted apart. But there was no blood, no dust. Shiomi was already gone. Splurt. The sound of an eye being pierced echoed through the air. Shiomi had rammed his spear straight through one of the demon god pillar's eyes. No fluid leaked out. Just the sound of something crystalline shattering, like a gemstone crushed to pieces. It had looked soft. Then suddenly turned hard. Almost like a non-Newtonian fluid, Shiomi thought, stifling a sarcastic complaint in his mind. Standing atop the demon god pillar, he looked down at the remaining intact eye and gave a cold sneer. You can't hold that form for long, can you? Of course, Shiomi didn't actually believe Barbados was that fragile. He was baiting him, trying to provoke a reaction. Barbados' attacks were increasingly frenzied. Even if it wasn't due to fatigue, Makiri clearly had a reason for wanting this fight over quickly. And Shiomi's words hit their mark. The undamaged eye twitched violently. Then came a flood of mana. Blinding beams of light erupted toward Shiomi, trying to swallow him whole. That's quite a surge. More mana than most top-level magi could muster, Shiomi said, appearing midair over 10 meters away. I don't know who your so-called king is, but for a magus to go this far, he's certainly earned some praise. If words worked, then he'd keep using them. Makiri had claimed to abandon his humanity. But he hadn't let go of his human heart. That contradiction was his weakness, and his fate had been sealed from the start. As expected, Barbados snapped. More tentacles surged up from the ground, surrounding Shiomi from every direction, leaving no path to escape. This time, they were going to bind him for good. In the end, all you've got is that silver tongue? Then die. The voice that rang out was flat and emotionless. Unlike Makiri's usual tone. But it couldn't mask the burning rage behind it. Not rage at being mocked, but at having their king mocked. Barbados had issued a death sentence. And yet, something felt wrong. What? Shiomi had clearly been restrained. There should have been no way to escape. But something unexpected happened. The tentacles began to lose their color, as if drained of power. They withered, cracked, and crumbled into dust. Fourth primordial rune, Rune of Liberation. Rune of Liberation. Shiomi lowered his gaze and spoke calmly. No form of magecraft or physical restraint can bind me. That includes something as trivial as these tentacles. Barbados' enormous form began to shudder. His eyes twitched and spun chaotically, out of sync. Fear and panic started to ripple through him. Primordial runes. A magus from the Age of Gods. So this is what His Majesty meant when he said it was unbeatable. A roar of denial echoed like a grinding machine struggling under strain. What? Shiomi narrowed his eyes, sensing that his assumptions had been slightly off. The King Makiri spoke of may have foreseen this failure from the very start. For reasons unknown, Makiri and the others had stood in Shiomi's way. Perhaps to atone, to redeem themselves. It might not have been a command from that king at all, but a mission Makiri and the others had taken on themselves. Either way, once they found the King Makiri had spoken of, they'd have their answers. Who was this person who could command the 72 demon gods of King Solomon and bestow the power of a demon god upon a human magus? With that thought, Shiomi raised his staff. The time was right. Mordred and Artoria once again unleashed the mana of their noble phantasms, coordinating with Shiomi's spell to launch an all-out assault. Begone, demon god Barbados. The blast was even more devastating than the one they had used against Paracelsus. Disoriented by Shiomi's provocation, Barbados failed to defend or counterattack. That allowed Shiomi to conserve mana. Enough to focus on retrieving the Singularity's holy grail and beginning restoration. Noble phantasm. Roadless Camelot, reaching the ultimate utopia. To ether, compressed and released. It merged with the holy spear, the magic sword, and Sakura's imaginary number magecraft, converging into a single torrent that engulfed Barbados. At first, he erected a magical barrier. But within seconds it shattered, collapsing like a landslide. The surge of mana consumed the towering pillar, incinerating every last tentacle that still writhed on the ruined streets. When the wave of destruction faded, at the far end of the devastated road, near the path to the museum, Makiri's Elgin lay sprawled on the ground. He tried to move, to act. But even lifting a finger was impossible. His magic circuits were completely burned out. Give it up. Your body's already past its limit. Shiomi pressed his spear blade to Makiri's throat. You've only defeated us. Not our king. Makiri gasped, barely clinging to life. Shiomi twisted his wrist. The blade flashed coldly. Makiri's head fell. He didn't get to finish his sentence. The dead don't get to talk about what comes next. Chapter 242. Even within the clock tower, knowledge of the secret passage connecting it to the British Museum's underground was limited to a handful of core magi. Mostly the lords of the 12 departments and their close associates. Shiomi only knew of it because of his connections with two of the lords from the Democratic faction. It wasn't the kind of secret that was particularly large or small. As the headquarters of the Magus world, even a full-scale assault by the Holy Church wouldn't guarantee its fall, making this passage seem almost irrelevant. But the situation in the London Singularity was far beyond any previous assumptions. As expected, most magi, including the lords, had already left London before the monsters descended, all for various legitimate reasons, Shiomi murmured as he flipped through the clock tower's access records. Only a small fraction of magi perished alongside the ground-level facilities of the clock tower. The truly influential figures had all made their exits under perfectly reasonable pretexts. What was the true significance of this quiet exodus? Shiomi wanted to discuss it with Morgan. But interference from the underground archive was too intense. Any contact with Chaldea was impossible. Had Shiomi not known how to disable the auto-triggered magical book guardians, Mordred and Artoria wouldn't be standing watch at the entrance. They'd be fighting to hold back the library's defenses. He'd have to make a mental note of this and bring it up later. With that thought, Shiomi stood up and called out to Sakura, who was assisting with the search. Sakura, find anything on your end? Yes, I've already found it. Sakura snapped out of her thoughts and responded quickly. The materials related to the boundary record belt that Dad mentioned. Someone already sorted and grouped them all together. They were really easy to locate. Someone organized them. Shiomi looked at the stack Sakura had laid on the table. So someone had come here before them, reviewed the same materials, and thinking they might be useful to future visitors, had intentionally arranged them in one place. Who had it been? Shiomi had no idea. But with no sign of them remaining, no clues left behind, he had no way to track them. He picked up one of the documents and glanced over at Sakura. You're curious too, right? About why that person sorted these records. What their goal was? No, not really, Sakura admitted, sounding slightly embarrassed. I was just thinking. Is it really okay to leave Saber and Lancer on guard together? If you're worried, go take a look, Shiomi said with a slight smile. Since the data's been organized, we'll finish this quickly anyway. There are servants, sure, but their relationship as parent and child. It's not really something we should interfere with, Sakura said, frowning a little. I just don't really get it. Don't get what? Shiomi asked as he flipped another page, scanning for relevant information. Sabers like me. We didn't get to choose who our parents were. From the moment we were born, our paths were already set. There was a note of quiet understanding in Sakura's voice. Shiomi realized then. Meeting Makiri's Elgin earlier must have stirred up memories for her. We can't choose where we come from, Shiomi said softly, but I always hoped that you and Karan could choose where you go. That had been his thinking when he came to Chaldea as well. The Antarctic was too far removed from the rest of civilization. Even for a Magus, coming and going wasn't easy. He'd feared it would make seeing family too difficult, and had nearly refused. But in the end, Sakura and Karan had joined Chaldea of their own volition, with their own strength, and become his colleagues. That's why I don't understand, Sakura finally voiced something she had never dared to ask. Why did Dad choose me? Karan was your friend's daughter. She was still a child when she was adopted, so that made sense. But what about me? Not asking didn't mean she hadn't thought about it. If anything, becoming a Magus made such questions even more inevitable. The deeper your understanding of the world, the more clearly you grasped the shape of your place in it. But Shiomi had never treated her poorly. That's why Sakura had buried the question deep down and never let herself dwell on it. There wasn't really any special reason, Shiomi said, knowing it was hard to explain. After all, the whole thing had originally been set in motion by BB for reasons still unclear. But for Sakura's sake, he needed to give a proper answer. I just wanted to pass on what my master taught me. Instead of having a child with uncertain potential, I thought it made more sense to directly choose someone with exceptional talent. He paused, a hint of guilt in his tone. Pretty lazy of me, huh? That sounds exactly like something you'd do. Sakura smiled, a little troubled but warm. But why not get married first? Try having a kid that way? Well, I had just split from Tako at the time. We were close, yeah, but calling it a relationship would have been a stretch, Shiomi said as he flipped through a stack of documents. And even if that weren't the case, suddenly being told to go find someone to marry isn't exactly easy. I couldn't approach it like a magus would, with pure pragmatism. But I also didn't want to drag an ordinary woman into all this. Turn her into a vessel for a magic crest. I see. Sakura responded softly, a little melancholic. Besides, I always knew where I was headed. When my time as a human ends, I'll return to the land of shadows, Shiomi said with a shake of his head. I didn't want to leave behind anything too complicated. Though, in the end, that didn't go as planned either. Looking back, his life had certainly been more complicated than that of most magi. Still, there's one thing I'm truly grateful for, he said with a quiet smile. That you and Karin became my family. That makes me happy. It's the same for us. Sakura smiled back just as warmly. Also, Dad. Didn't you forget about Grey? Shiomi shook his head. She's different. We helped her escape the fate she was born into. Until she resolves everything with King Arthur, Grey will keep moving forward, trying to become someone entirely her own. As he spoke, he flipped through a few more pages, then grabbed 2 worn volumes from the side. Laying them open to the same section, he began cross-referencing them. And then let out a low gasp. I knew it. Heroic spirit summoning wasn't something the Tosaka, Matu, and Insburn families came up with on their own. The Holy Grail War was just a repurposed version of an already existing guardian system, twisted for selfish gain. The original summoning ritual was created to combat a great enemy, using the 7 strongest humans as a weapon. Wait. Are you saying? Sakura immediately pushed aside her earlier melancholy and leaned in to examine the material with him. Chapter 243, not long after, Mordred, having tried and failed to start a conversation with Artoria, who remained silent, constantly surveying her surroundings, finally saw the masters returning from the underground archive back through the tunnel. Oh. You finally came out. There wasn't even a proper enemy out here. I was so bored. Mordred grumbled. Shiomi raised an eyebrow. Realizing the surface had been uneventful, he gave an apologetic shake of his head. Sorry. The clock tower's data on this subject turned out to be a lot more extensive than expected. We needed to understand the mechanics of heroic spirit summoning, and more importantly, why servants are appearing despite there being no Holy Grail War. Huh? I thought this singularity was only stable because it had a Holy Grail? Mordred asked, clearly confused. Sakura shook her head, her expression turning serious. The Holy Grail only exists to sustain the singularity. Saber, you must know this. You weren't summoned here to participate in a Holy Grail War. Yeah, I've got some idea, Mordred scratched her head. Seems like I was called to deal with whatever disaster this singularity is facing. I even have records of my past roles as a servant in other places. Shiomi turned to her. Remember the archer Sakura's sister summoned during the Fuiuki Grail War? That weird archer guy? Sure, I remember. Even though we ended up losing together. He introduced himself as a heroic spirit from the future, Shiomi said. Someone who gave up his posthumous existence to become what's known as a guardian. A device formed by sacrificing oneself to the counterforce. He never gave his true name, but he wasn't lying about the rest. Then Shiomi looked to Artoria. I don't know if you remember, but the Artoria I knew also gave up her life after death. She became a guardian too, in exchange for a chance to seek the Holy Grail and have her wish fulfilled. As they began walking, Shiomi led the group and continued explaining. Heroic spirits and guardians are a bit different. Both are souls that have reached the throne, but heroic spirits are summoned by humanity's hopes. Guardians, on the other hand, are born from humanity's despair. No matter which side we come from, we're summoned. Or respond to the call. To save humanity, Artoria finally said. We exist to lend our power for the sake of human survival. Mordred stared at Shiomi, wanting confirmation from someone she trusted. Is that really true? She didn't mind if it was. Whether as a king, a knight, or a heroic spirit, she'd always been willing to use her strength to protect the weak. It's true. According to the clock tower's records, heroic spirit summoning is actually the work of the counterforce. Or more precisely, the counterforce of humankind itself. To the planet, humanity's survival isn't essential. In fact, if humanity were to endanger the planet, the counterforce would summon something to eliminate them. But that wasn't relevant to the current situation, so Shiomi kept that part to himself. Originally, heroic spirits summoned by the counterforce manifested in 7 vessels, all for the sole purpose of defeating a single enemy. A catastrophic threat to the world of mankind. A threat to mankind. You mean something that would only destroy humans? Mordred asked skeptically. She'd never learned this kind of information. In her understanding, destroying humanity and destroying the world were the same thing. Like when people say, the world has ended. Counterforce is divided into two kinds, Shiomi explained. The first comes from the collective unconscious of humanity. A will to survive. That's the counterforce of humankind. The planet itself, however, possesses another form of life. This life doesn't want to die either, and from that instinctive will to live comes the counterforce of the planet. He waved a hand, signaling Mordred not to get too hung up on the distinction. The point is, heroic spirit summoning originates from the former. Its true purpose is to harness the power of 7 vessels to defeat an entity bent on annihilating humanity and destroying the civilization we've built. As he spoke, the path before them sloped deeper underground, showing signs of neglect yet still bearing traces of human construction. The so-called 7 vessels refer to the 7 classes. Whether it's your Artoria, the classes you've been assigned are only imitations or derivatives of the original 7. TCH. That doesn't sound great, Mordred muttered, pulling a face. She didn't like it. But she couldn't deny it. It's not worth getting hung up on, Shiomi reassured her with a smile. Spirit origins and class designations are really just a matter of access rights. If a disaster meets certain conditions, even someone who's not one of the original 7 can be assigned a matching class by the counterforce to deal with it specifically. So where are we heading now? Artoria asked. She looked ahead. The tunnel stretched on, its end marked by a faint light. Beyond that lay the entrance to a massive underground cavern. To the Holy Grail, Shiomi answered. If I'm right, the mastermind behind Makiri and the others has already arrived at this singularity to declare their defeat. Unable to accept that outcome, they've gathered everything they have for one final, desperate fight. Shiomi's face remained calm, though a slight furrow appeared between his brows. He could already feel it. The enormous swell of mana that dwarfed even the Holy Grail. Only an existence at the absolute peak of the 7 classes could produce such overwhelming magical energy. No matter what happened next, it would be a brutal battle. As they exited the long underground passage and stepped into the great hollow chamber beyond, Shiomi immediately noticed the structural similarities to Fuiuki's Greater Grail Cavern. But knowing Makiri had been one of the original architects behind the Grail system, it wasn't all that surprising. You kept me waiting, a voice said from atop the high platform where the Holy Grail rested. You thought if you stalled long enough, I'd give up and leave? That you'd be able to save your life that way? The voice was distorted, layered, difficult to identify. But its gaze was fixed on only one person. Tenkai Shiomi. Everyone else was meaningless. Just dust, not even worth acknowledging. As the figure gradually came into focus, Shiomi saw it clearly, a silhouette cloaked in calamity and dread, yet unmistakably familiar. You're? Shiomi's eyes went wide. For a second, he thought he might be mistaken. But there was no mistaking it. The most formidable enemy he and Morgan had ever faced during the Holy Grail War 10 years ago. The King of Magecraft. Solomon. Chapter 244. However, Shiomi immediately dismissed that thought. He knew perfectly well where the King of Magecraft, Solomon, was. Yet, the man standing high above, looking down at the Chaldea group with disdain, was unmistakably Solomon. His body, his mana. Everything about him affirmed it beyond doubt. Shiomi, what's happening over there? We're getting heavy signal interference on Chaldea's end. We can't get a clear read on your situation. What's the source of that sudden surge of mana? Ramani's anxious voice came through. Clearly, he had noticed the anomaly through Chaldea's systems and had shifted his attention to the 4th singularity. Sorry, Dr. Roman. We'll talk later. Shiomi hesitated for a moment but chose not to end the transmission. He kept his eyes fixed warily on the man. He subtly raised a hand, signaling Sakura and the others to stay alert and remain silent. He would handle this. The man with Solomon's face slowly spoke. Oh. Just like me, you can only hear but not see, huh? Chaldea detached itself from the timeline and became an unreachable stronghold. Even my eyes, which can see the future and pierce through all things, struggle to detect it. That's why Chaldea managed to survive. Ugly, pitiful, meaningless. Clinging to life in defiance of its fated destruction, drifting aimlessly like a wretched little boat on the sea of void. Shiomi stepped forward and pointed at the man. As long as Chaldea still draws breath, even if destruction is inevitable, we'll overturn it anyway. A stain left behind by the burnt-out human history. The only remnant of my work. Fools who dare to resist me, the man replied. You've said a lot. How about introducing yourself? Or is it that, as a servant, you're bound to hide your true name no matter your spirit origin? Shiomi stood ready, spear in one hand and staff in the other, fully prepared for combat. It felt different. The longer the conversation continued, the more Xiaomi sensed that this Solomon was not the same as the one from 10 years ago. The only constant was the man's overwhelming presence. Far beyond what any Holy Grail war ritual could contain. That tone. Sounds like you already know my true name but just won't admit it. The man paused, lips pursed, then smiled with the condescension of someone scrutinizing insects. No matter. I enjoy this kind of ugly struggle. Otherwise, I wouldn't have bothered to wait here in my spare time. He slowly raised his arms, spreading them wide to reveal both hands. Each bearing 5 rings. I am the ultimate goal you seek. The king who commands the 72 demon gods and brings ruin to humanity. My name is Solomon, one of the 7 grand servants standing at the pinnacle of all heroic spirits. Solomon? The signal's bad, the audio's breaking up. Did he really just claim that? Romani's voice was filled with shock. Of course. He was right there. And someone else was using his name. Even after being reborn as an ordinary human, nothing had changed. Sounds like it, Xiaomi said with a grimace, his smile sharp and unpleasant. And now you call yourself a grand servant. Grand caster. I never imagined that the collective unconscious meant to suppress humanity's urge for self-destruction would act to destroy humanity itself. Halfway through his words, he suddenly froze. The original purpose of the 7 grand servants, those at the pinnacle of the servant classes, was to counter threats that endangered humanity. If that's the case, then there must be a calamity on par with a grand servant. What if that calamity had taken on the guise of a grand servant using some unknown power? Or perhaps it had been summoned as a servant? Who summoned you? Xiaomi asked cautiously. Don't lump me in with those useless fools, Solomon replied irritably. After my death, I awakened on my own and ascended to heroic spirit. I am both a heroic spirit and a living being. There is no master above me. I am myself, and I act according to my own will. You're talking about the incineration of humanity. Xiaomi felt a chill run down his spine. So after becoming a heroic spirit, you lost faith in humanity and chose to destroy human history? Not a bad guess. For a human, you're slightly more useful than the rest of your kind in this universe, the king of Magecraft said, spreading his hands and glancing upward. The 72 demon gods gained physical forms and were reborn, anchoring themselves in different eras. What you call singularities. Those are the anchors. The demon gods are wedges that bring this planet to a halt. And the bands of light swirling in the skies? That is the form of my noble phantasm. Understanding dawned on Xiaomi. So those things in the skies above each singularity weren't natural phenomena after all. Solomon continued, that is my 3rd noble phantasm, Ars Omidal Salomonis, the time of birth hath come, I am the remedy of eternity. Each band of light is a heat ray that rivals the holy sword. Equivalent to the one that Lancer once wielded. He glanced at Artoria. Layered hundreds of millions of times over, they form a noble phantasm that strikes at human reason itself. This version of the King of Magecraft radiated a dangerously overwhelming aura, completely unlike the Solomon Xiaomi had once known. But then Solomon reached out his palm toward Xiaomi. As I said before, you're more useful than most. Even I have to admit that. So I'm giving you a choice. A choice? Submit to me. Or die here, Solomon said casually. There was no mistaking it. Solomon saw value in Xiaomi and was willing to extend an invitation. But if Xiaomi refused, he'd crush him like an insect. What a pathetic question. I choose to fight for the future. Together with my family and my companions in Chaldea. Xiaomi raised his spear and aimed it at Solomon. That was the signal. He would strike first, probing for weaknesses, while Sakura and the 2 servants provided cover. Whether or not they made it out intact didn't matter. What mattered was extracting intel on the enemy's capabilities and relaying it back to Chaldea. Roadless Camelot, reaching the ultimate utopia, activated in an instant. A beam of mana shot straight at Solomon, only to be pushed back just inches from his body. This Magecraft has touched the realm of ultimate fantasy. Impressive, Solomon said with an easy smile. In return, I'll use 4 of them. He was referring to a portion of his 3rd noble phantasm. Unleashing 4 of the light bands to counter Xiaomi's spell. A crushing force surged toward Xiaomi. It felt as though he was facing 4 Artorias unleashing their noble phantasms at once. Chapter 245, however, the King of Magecraft held the upper hand. Raising his left hand, he gently clenched the air. And instantly, the spirit origins of however, the King of Magecraft held the upper hand. Raising his left hand, he gently clenched the air. And instantly, the spirit origins of however, the King of Magecraft held the upper hand. Raising his left hand, he gently clenched the air. And instantly, the spirit origins of Mordred and Artoria, who were about to unleash their noble phantasms, destabilized. Their half-activated noble phantasms were forcefully interrupted. With a twitch of his right fingertips, he dispersed Sakura's magecraft and effortlessly fixed the space around her, binding her in place. Distracted by his concern for Sakura, Shiomi lost focus for a moment. And in that moment, the king of magecraft's noble phantasm overwhelmed him and brought him face to face with the enemy. "Don't worry about me, father." Sakura's strained voice reached him. Bound, compressed, and pulled apart by invisible magical forces, she could vanish at any moment. Yet she showed no fear. No trace of pleading. "Please. Just fight." Solomon didn't even glance at her. He simply looked down at Shiomi, who was seething with rage. "Let Sakura go." Shiomi ground out each word through clenched teeth. "Foolish. You still don't understand your position." Solomon's fingers twitched slightly, and Sakura could no longer even speak. Only a faint, rasping sound escaped her throat. "You toy with human lives. Is that what you stand for?" Shiomi gripped his wand tightly, maintaining his mana output. He was the only one capable of standing against Solomon. The servants were immobilized by an unknown force, and Sakura had been completely suppressed. Perhaps he could land a devastating blow on the king of magecraft. But the cost would be Sakura's life. "You are one of the rare humans to have seen the realm of the dead. Don't speak of life. When death is a given, human life has no worth. You don't get to decide the value of human life." Shiomi forced the words through clenched teeth. "Then tell me. What have you humans done these past 2,000 years? Died, aimlessly. Unable to overcome death, yet still terrified of it. If you cannot defeat death, then the only rightful path is to abandon your fear of it. If you see death as terrifying and tragic, then you should abandon your so-called wisdom." The king of magecraft sneered as he continued, "Master of Chaldea, who has escaped the realm of the dead. Why do you still fight? You know life ends in death. You know life has already faded. So why cling to it? Why struggle to keep living when you know full well there's no salvation for humanity's future?" Even so. Sweat beaded on Shiomi's forehead and slid down his cheek. "What's wrong with humans wanting to live?" He shouted the words with all his might, his voice raw and hoarse. It was precisely because he truly understood death that Shiomi knew how precious life was. That's why he wanted, no matter what, to see a flower bloom in that place, a tree grow, a fruit ripen. "So that's your answer? Forceful, I'll give you that. But it's meaningless." Solomon raised his hand and flung Sakura 7 or 8 meters away. He paid her no further mind as she tumbled across the ground. His focus was only on Shiomi, who had been pushed to the brink. Raising his ring-laden left hand, he declared, "As an honor, I will grant you death." 4 additional beams of light. The bands of light surged. Shiomi could no longer resist. Overflowing with mana, they pierced through him like spears, driving through his heart and leaving behind a smooth, circular hole. At that moment, the 2 colliding currents of mana reached their limits. And shattered. "So you set the primordial rune to trigger at the moment of death, embedded in your heart," Solomon said with a light wave of his hand. "But even that rune is now broken." Blood dripped from the corner of Shiomi's mouth. His body lost strength, tossed by the wind like a lifeless puppet. He rolled across the ground a few times before coming to a stop. His open eyes gradually dimmed, hollowing out. Until he was nothing more than a lifeless corpse. Blood pooled beneath him. "Dad." Sakura stumbled forward, collapsing beside Shiomi. The body she touched still held a trace of warmth, but there was no heartbeat, no breath. Tears streamed down her face. For a magus, death was inevitable. But Sakura had never imagined she'd have to witness someone she loved so deeply vanish like this. Instinctively, she grabbed the wand and aimed it at Solomon, preparing a spell. But the man had already turned his back. "Well then, I'm heading back. That took a lot longer than I expected." "So you never cared about us from the start, huh?" Mordred growled, forcing herself to speak through the pain. The king of magecraft paused, but didn't turn around. "I never cared about you. Whether I kill you now or let you live, it makes no difference. Only that man. I had to erase him with my own hands. Got it? The rest of you aren't even worth my attention. However, if you manage to eliminate all 7 singularities..." He finally tilted his head slightly, a confident, arrogant smirk on his lips. "Then I might consider treating you as a problem worth solving." As Solomon finished speaking, the space before the greater grail twisted. And his figure vanished. From beginning to end, he had never taken Sakura's power seriously. That flick of his finger had been nothing more than a way to force Shiomi to give up resistance and stop wasting his time. "Sakura? What's happening?" "Shiomi's life signals have stopped." "What's going on?" In that brief moment, Chaldea's communication had been completely cut off, leaving Romani in the dark. He cried out again in alarm. Dad. Dad. Sakura collapsed to her knees, burying her head in Shiomi's chest, sobbing in broken gasps. Master. With the King of Magecraft gone, the instability in the Great Grail disappeared completely. The spirit origin destabilization began to fade, and the barely recovered Mordred and Artoria started making their way toward the pair. Their master had died before their eyes. Nothing could wound their pride more than this. Wait. What's going on? Shiomi's vitals. They haven't vanished? No, they're coming back. Romani's voice trembled with shock, overwhelmed by the string of impossible developments. Sakura suddenly looked up, eyes locked on Shiomi's body. At some point, the gaping hole in his chest had vanished. Only the damage to his battle suit remained, evidence that what had happened wasn't just an illusion. She couldn't make sense of it. Then she felt it. Shiomi's heart beginning to beat again. His limp hand, resting on the ground, twitched faintly. The change didn't escape the servants either. Their eyes widened in disbelief. The dull, lifeless gaze began to regain its light. And then, with a sudden gasp for air, Shiomi jolted awake, startling Sakura into stillness. A violent cough racked his body as he turned and spat out the blood lodged in his throat. Ha! Ha! Clutching his chest, he struggled to sit up, panting hard, visibly stunned by what had just occurred. Dad. Are you okay? Sakura asked, dazed. Barely breathing, Shiomi murmured, still trying to process what had happened to him. But before he could think more, Sakura threw herself into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. He pushed his lingering questions aside and gently stroked her hair to soothe her. Sorry for worrying you. Mordred approached, seemingly ready to slap him on the shoulder. But halfway there, she pulled back, giving him a light push instead. Seriously? You've got Resurrection Magecraft and didn't tell us? I nearly broke a sweat. Her words were gruff, but the wonder in her eyes was plain. Artoria said nothing, simply staring at Shiomi. That wasn't Resurrection Magecraft. The King of Magecraft had spoken truthfully. He had discovered the primordial runes Shiomi had prepared to counter a fatal blow. And destroyed them, along with Shiomi's heart. He only left after confirming Shiomi was well and truly dead. He had even used Shiomi's weakness as leverage. And yet, despite it all, the King of Magecraft had failed to see Shiomi's true nature. My husband, what's the situation now? Morgan's voice came through, calm as ever, as if she'd known all along Shiomi wouldn't die so easily. Everything went smoothly. The servant who called himself the King of Magecraft has retreated. Once we finish resting, we'll begin recovering the Holy Grail and proceed with repairing the Singularity, Shiomi reported. Romani let out a long breath, the sound of him wiping sweat audible even through comms. Good. Good. Just rest for now. I'll begin preparations for your spiritual transfer back. Thanks. Shiomi gently held Sakura in his arms, letting her snuggle into him a while longer, no longer crying. Chapter 246, with the King of Magecraft gone, there was no one left to obstruct Chaldea from retrieving the Holy Grail. He could have wiped out Sakura, and with the King of Magecraft gone, there was no one left to obstruct Chaldea from retrieving the Holy Grail. He could have wiped out Sakura, and with the King of Magecraft gone, there was no one left to obstruct Chaldea from retrieving the Holy Grail. He could have wiped out Sakura and the others too, but in the end, he didn't lift a finger. His disregard and contempt were plain as day. He'd made it clear that even if Chaldea reclaimed the Holy Grail from the London Singularity, it meant nothing to him. Ugh. This is such a buzzkill. We've recovered the Grail, but I just feel gross all over, Mordred muttered. Sakura looked toward the halted Greater Grail ritual and the crystallized Holy Grail, now compact and ready for transport. After killing Dad, the King of Magecraft said that while we're still alive, we mean nothing to him. Unless we recover all 7 Grails from the Singularities, he won't even consider Chaldea a threat worth dealing with. Seriously, how far does he have to look down on us? Mordred said, then suddenly blinked. Wait a second. Wasn't Castor in the last Holy Grail War that same bastard King of Magecraft? The earlier battle had been too chaotic for her to recall this detail. In truth, neither she nor Sakura had seen Castor directly by the end of that war. I don't really know what's going on either. Sakura shook her head. Shiomi had never revealed Romani Archimon's true origins to anyone. Regardless, the act of incinerating humanity in the name of the King of Magecraft is undeniable. After confirming the exact time for the spiritual transfer with Chaldea, Shiomi stood and responded to Mordred. That's why stopping him is something only we, the last remaining humans, can and must do. According to Chaldea's monitoring, the magical fog over London had already started to disperse, and the Singularity was beginning to self-repair now that the Grail was gone. Well said, Master's old man. Mordred clapped him on the shoulder. Only the humans living in their own era get to decide humanity's fate, right? Then her expression faltered slightly. I really wanted to go back with you guys. But since I was summoned by the singularity or maybe by the counterforce, and now the singularity's disappearing, I don't have anywhere to return to. Because she wasn't summoned via Chaldea's heroic spirit summoning system, she couldn't undergo spirit transfer to return with them. Well, maybe something like this will happen again. As the servant closest to us. Or rather, closest to Sakura. Maybe the next singularity will call you forth for some other reason, Shiomi said with a faint smile. Mordred burst out laughing. Oh. If we meet again, even if I don't remember you, feel free to ask me for help. Her voice dropped to a murmur, almost too soft to hear. And I'm glad I got to fight alongside father this time. Sakura hadn't caught what she said and tried to ask, but Mordred waved her off with an awkward chuckle, clearly flustered. Shiomi then glanced over at Artoria, who was still silently watching the remains of the Greater Grail Ritual's pedestal. It's about time we said goodbye. It was a close call, but thanks for everything, Shiomi said, offering his thanks. I didn't do anything. The King of Magecraft came to this singularity for one purpose, to kill or subjugate you. Artoria suddenly voiced the truth. Didn't think I warranted such a grand entrance, having the mastermind himself show up just to recruit me. Shiomi smiled wryly. Maybe in the future, he saw, you're the one who'll stand in his way, Artoria said. Be careful. Yeah. Shiomi nodded. He knew he'd have to delve deeper into this once he got back. Including the abnormalities in his own body. There was no way the King of Magecraft had targeted him without a reason. But just being from the Shadow Realm and inheriting the primordial runes wasn't nearly enough to justify that. Also, as my sister Morgan mentioned, I manifested in this form to resist the erosion of the Holy Sphere. Artoria's face remained expressionless, but her eyes were sharp and solemn. Everyone, stay alert. In other singularities, perhaps. Perhaps? No, it's nothing. Just unfounded speculation. Artoria dismissed the thought. Her and Mordred's bodies began to glow and gradually turn translucent. The retreat of the servants from the singularity had begun. Shiomi and Sakura bowed in thanks once more to the two servants who had fought alongside them in this brief yet intense battle. Once the two had fully vanished, Chaldea completed preparations for spirit transfer. Their existence was verified, and the transfer process began. After a short moment of unconsciousness, they opened their eyes again to find themselves inside the spirit transfer chamber, with Morgan standing just outside. Behind her was Romani, looking thoroughly dejected as he was dragged over by Da Vinci. The spirit transfer went smoothly, Morgan said, glancing at Shiomi's chest. Still, the damage to their combat suits hadn't carried over. Traveling between the London Singularity and Chaldea required the Master's body to be converted into spiritrons. So long as their core essence remained unchanged, their existence would be properly reconstructed. But if there had been any essential change, serious discrepancies could occur during rematerialization. The torn battle suit was trivial by comparison. Looks like Sakura and I were the fastest team, Shiomi said. But also the most troublesome one. Romani sighed. I should have executed an emergency spirit transfer faster, but the shock was too severe, and you nearly. Or rather, actually did. Die. Romani didn't believe it was just a momentary data lapse from equipment interference. Even if Morgan had offered that explanation. Well, the mastermind himself showing up just to erase me. It's an honor, I guess. Shiomi's tone was light. That said, there's a lot I need to go over regarding this singularity's restoration. How about a small meeting in the conference room 12 hours from now, Dr. Romani? Eh? Romani blinked, lowering the hand resting behind his neck. Just you, me, and Morgan. Shiomi turned toward Sakura, who looked visibly exhausted. Sakura, get some rest for now. Once you've recovered, head to the command center and help support the teams still active in Singularities 1 and 2. Da Vinci seemed a little puzzled by the special meeting roster, but Romani understood immediately. Got it. See you in the conference room in 12 hours. Chapter 247, in Chaldea, there was a conference room reserved for the director, typically used for small meetings among department heads. That was where in Chaldea, there was a conference room reserved for the director, typically used for small meetings among department heads. That was where Shiomi and Romani had agreed to meet. Wow, I didn't expect it to be this room. Think the director will get mad? Romani asked as he took a seat. Shiomi shrugged. It's fine. If she asks, just say it was my call. Anyway, how are things at Singularities 1 and 2? Any signs of trouble? No issues so far. They're not moving as quickly as your team, but everything's going smoothly. Romani started with a smile, though it faded as he spoke. Considering the appearance of the demon god Barbados at the fourth singularity and that grand servant who called himself the King of Magecraft, I think we need to keep a closer watch on the first and second singularities, since they're still undergoing repairs. That man mentioned anchoring demon god pillars across different eras. There might be more of them elsewhere, Shiomi said. We've already factored that possibility into our contingency plans, Romani replied. If anything similar crops up and it gets too dangerous, we'll prioritize an emergency transfer. After that, their small talk gave way to a brief silence. Morgan calmly sipped her coffee as she waited for the conversation to get to the real point. So, what's your take on it, Romani? Shiomi asked directly. That man who called himself Solomon. The King of Magecraft. Who was he? Do you have any leads? Well, if I'm being honest. Romani rubbed the back of his head. I think he might be the real deal. I know that sounds irresponsible. So by that logic, the one we've been working with is the fake? Morgan quipped. Hey, come on now. Romani's mouth twitched. Shiomi stroked his chin thoughtfully. Let me ask you this, Romani. What is Solomon, the King of Magecraft, to you now? Is he a part of your past? Or? That's a great question. Just what I'd expect from you. Romani smiled, genuinely pleased. Not even Marisberry, who called him a friend, had ever asked something like that. To me, Solomon and I feel like two entirely different people. Why? Shiomi asked, fully focused. Because Solomon didn't have human emotions. Or maybe it's more accurate to say he never had a human life to begin with. From the moment he was born, he was treated as a king who could hear the voice of God. People expected him to fulfill that role, and so he did. Even his title as the Passionate King came from responding to those expectations. Romani explained slowly, laying out his thoughts with care. Like the Queen of Sheba? Shiomi asked. Yes. In truth, Solomon never had a single second of free will. Even though he was granted omniscience, he wasn't allowed to voice any opinions. Solomon was just the name of a construct. An apparatus created by gods and humans to help that kingdom prosper. So he had no humanity, no connection to the world as a person, and was never granted the freedom we call being human. As Romani spoke, Shiomi recalled what Morgan had once said in the car 11 years ago, just before the final battle of the Holy Grail War. And what Gilgamesh had said even earlier. Both were kings created by gods and humans, but Solomon and Gilgamesh are complete opposites, Shiomi murmured. Exactly. Honestly, I've always felt a bit envious of Gilgamesh. He was born like Solomon. Created by gods and men. But he refused to be just a tool. He chose to lead humanity and sever ties with the gods himself. Romani said with genuine emotion. Though. I won't defend what he did as a tyrant. Shiomi couldn't help but chuckle at that bit of self-justification. It was a laugh of mutual understanding. So that's why you made your wish. To become human? Shiomi leaned back in the chair, something like a single-seat sofa. I met the King of Conquerors once. He also wished for a physical body, but it was so he could reign over the world again. To conquer everything. That's because he had more freedom than I did. The King of Conquerors had the freedom of a human. He could act on his own desires, Romani replied. That's why I wanted to become human too. No magic circuits, no clairvoyance. But with real freedom. Morgan gave a small nod. But that freedom came with chains. Maybe. But even so, I've been deeply satisfied these past 10 years. Romani shook his head, gently rejecting Morgan's view. It's been like a dream. I see, Shiomi said quietly. Then that man couldn't have been Solomon. I don't know how he obtained power convincing enough to fool even yous, but someone who can freely express hatred for humanity and burn the world down can't possibly be Solomon. Even when summoned as a servant, the King of Magecraft had faithfully upheld his duty. If Marisberry had ordered him to end his life, he would have complied. Even without a command spell. If the realization of the third magic was the path to humanity's evolution, and if that was the answer this era needed, then Solomon would have gladly sacrificed his second life for it. That was who the King of Magecraft, Solomon, truly was. I'm glad you see it that way, Romani said. Well, we're not just co-workers. We're friends too. Shiomi smiled gently. But that man calling himself Solomon. There was something off about him besides what we just discussed. I can't quite place it. Maybe the battle was too brief, and I missed something important. Maybe. It's this. Romani pulled off his glove, revealing a ring on his left hand. Ah. Shiomi suddenly remembered. All 10 of King Solomon's rings were gold. But the man who appeared in the London Singularity had worn one that was silver. This ring was left by King Solomon. He feared that Magecraft might one day endanger humanity, so before his death, he sent it into the future, where it was discovered by Marisberry. It's also the holy relic he used for the summoning, Romani explained. As for the other 9 rings, I don't know what became of them. What happens if this ring is used? Shiomi asked. Romani hesitated, then gave a sheepish smile. I'd probably die. When the 10 rings are reunited, the King of Magecraft can activate his first noble phantasm to reenact the legend of returning mystery to the heavens and erase himself entirely from human history. Chapter 248, It was too cruel. So much so that Shiomi couldn't fully grasp the meaning behind that noble phantasm. He covered his face with one hand, it was too cruel. So much so that Shiomi couldn't fully grasp the meaning behind that noble phantasm. He covered his face with one hand, his expression somber. Keep the ring safe. It's best not to use it. Shiomi paused, a sudden thought striking him. No. There's another way. Can you give it to me? Romani blinked, confused. If you willingly pass it to me, the right to use it transfers to me. But I'm not the King of Magecraft. I can't activate that cruel noble phantasm, Shiomi explained. However, it might be the key to seizing control of the remaining 9 rings. With it, I could pull the 10 rings out from under that man's control and use them myself. The idea stemmed from his previous experience using Avalon. Still, Shiomi wasn't certain he could truly master the power of all 10 rings. Why would you do that? You've got some secret tactic? Romani asked, deeply concerned. He was human. He feared death. He didn't want to see this ring used at all. But if another path existed, he couldn't ignore it either. It's not a hidden tactic, Shiomi replied. It's a hidden truth. About me. He raised his hand. The wand he'd obtained from Singularity F slowly materialized, floating in the center of the round table. This came from Ku Chilane. He handed it over after retreating from Singularity F, badly injured. This is... Romani stood up in shock. Morgan's eyes widened. That's not ordinary ash tree wood. It's made from part of the world brie? Why would Ku Chilane have something like that? Most likely the work of Odin, Shiomi said, voicing his suspicion. He must have interfered with the Throne of Heroes and arranged for my senior to appear in Singularity F with this wand. Once the initial surprise wore off, Romani slowly sat back down. Odin. The chief god of Norse mythology. Why would he do something like that for you? I think it's tied to the secret I'm carrying, Shiomi answered. Killed, and yet revived. I see, Morgan lowered her eyes. Then it all makes sense. Shiomi paused, exchanging a glance with Romani before turning to Morgan again. Originally, this was a truth your master should have revealed, Morgan said with a gentle smile. But this time, I'll reveal my husband's secret before you get the chance to ask her. Then, with a slight tone, she teased, Doctor, what's your take on my husband's condition during the London Singularity? If I had to say, it was definitely within the domain of Age of Gods Magecraft, but even that doesn't quite cover it. Even back at Singularity F, his recovery rate was already abnormal, Romani replied. Morgan gave a slow nod. You're the one who helped define Magecraft as the manipulation of phenomena. Do you still remember the general classifications of miracles? Magecraft, rituals, sacraments, and curses, Shiomi answered quickly. My master taught me that. Wait. As he said it, he suddenly remembered the rest of that long-past lesson. There was a category above those 4. A higher tier. Would you mind, for once, telling someone other than me what you studied in the Land of Shadows? Morgan asked with a knowing smile. You can skip the martial training part. Now sensing where this was going, Shiomi slowly began recounting what had happened during his time in the Land of Shadows. Romani's face twisted in disbelief, as though Shiomi were telling an outright lie. Magecraft that creates life. In a place where life doesn't exist? That's impossible. Maybe if it were in the outside world. But the Land of Shadows is a realm of pure death. A place devoid of the very concept of life. Even your master shouldn't be able to overcome that. Morgan, for once, acted as a calm mediator. She raised a hand to quiet him. That's the brilliance of my husband's accidental genius, she said. By sheer chance, he crossed the threshold of miracle. Leaving behind Magecraft and stepping into a domain only gods can reach. A domain of authority. Authority. Shiomi finally gave voice to the truth. Because once he left that place, leaving behind a realm ruled solely by the concept of death, he'd mistaken his new grasp over life itself as a manifestation of primordial rune Magecraft. But authority over life? That's something only a creator god, or perhaps a mother goddess, would possess, Romani said with a sigh, rubbing his forehead. No matter how you looked at it, the King of Magecraft had only ever performed a single miracle in life. He never delved deeper, never crossed into the domain of divinity through study. Still, it was now clear why the man calling himself the King of Magecraft had appeared in London to kill Shiomi with his own hands instead of sending someone else. So he showed up because he sensed Shiomi's power and decided he had to eliminate him personally. No. If that were true, then after killing my husband, he would have taken the body and sealed it away instead of simply leaving, Morgan said with a mocking smile. The King of Magecraft's clairvoyance couldn't pierce through my husband's true nature. Could it? Romani let out a dry, embarrassed laugh. That's true. Even though he no longer held Solomon's name, fragments of those memories remained. It was precisely because not even his clairvoyance could fully see through Shiomi's potential that he had asked the King of Heroes to stall the others. Just so he could face Shiomi and Morgan one-on-one. Even if my husband has touched upon the realm of authority, neither I, the doctor, nor even the King of Magecraft could give you guidance, Morgan said with a wry smile. That's a place we Magi have never reached. But Romani had another thought. He looked down at the gloves he had taken off. And the last ring. The power to step through the gate of authority. A wand made from the world tree, gifted by Odin. The age of gods, Magecraft and martial arts you learned in the land of shadows. He listed. If it's you. Maybe. It was just a flash of inspiration, Shiomi said, raising a hand to stop him. As for what to do. Maybe the answer won't come until I stand before that Solomon again. Romani shook his head. I'm just a man now, living life as a human. So I want to gamble, like a human would. I'll entrust this ring. The one King Solomon sent to the future. To you, who belong to this era. Or maybe, Morgan said lightly, eyes on the ring now lying in front of Shiomi, it's more like a prayer to the gods. Don't put me on that kind of pedestal. It's not doing me any favors. Shiomi couldn't even smile. He understood the weight behind Romani entrusting the ring to him. If he failed to act, then the ring's true owner might. He carefully picked up the ring and placed it in his palm. That's enough talk about Solomon and my own situation for now. What I want to do next is propose a revision to our singularity restoration plans. Closing his fingers around the ring, Shiomi passed the folder beside him to Romani, who was just finishing putting on his gloves. Chapter 249. The original battle plan was based on the situation in Singularity F using the confirmed human order foundation values from each of the The original battle plan was based on the situation in Singularity F using the confirmed human order foundation values from each of the identified singularities. The available personnel capable of participating in Spiritron transfer were divided into 3 teams, each assigned to restore human order in their respective locations. The human order foundation value of the Orlan singularity was the closest to that of Singularity F. So it was assigned to Olga Marie, Ritsuka, and Mesh. Led by the capable Magus and Director, their mission was to gain practical experience in various areas within this singularity. The slightly higher valued Rome singularity was assigned to Karn and Gray, with a similar goal of accumulating field experience. Based on this strategy, Shiomi originally believed that once the 6 singularities were resolved, everyone would regroup and head to the 7th together. However, an unexpected situation occurred at the London singularity. Humanity was set ablaze. A man calling himself the King of Magecraft appeared before Shiomi, demanding his submission or death. With the enemy's identity becoming increasingly clear, Denkai Shiomi proposed a new strategy. So, you're saying that we should all meet up before heading to the 3rd singularity together? After completing restoration work at the 1st and 2nd singularities and returning to Chaldea, Olga Marie examined Shiomi's plan during a strategy meeting and asked earnestly. No. More precisely, you all will rendezvous, while I go alone to the 5th singularity we confirmed a few days ago, Shiomi replied. The King of Magecraft possesses clairvoyance that allows him to see the past and the future. Although he can't perceive what's happening in Chaldea, he'll definitely notice if I reappear in a singularity to conduct restoration work. Karin crossed her arms thoughtfully. So, you plan to act as bait? No way, that's far too dangerous. Sakura was the first to object. Though the incident where Shiomi nearly lost his life had been downplayed and officially attributed to signal interference. So as not to affect morale. Sakura, who had witnessed it firsthand, refused to accept it. I can't agree with this either. No one can say for sure whether the King of Magecraft will show up in front of Sensei again, Olga Marie said with worry as she set down the plan. If even someone like Sensei lacked confidence, then Chaldea would stand no chance against the King of Magecraft. But what Mr. Shiomi means is, if he acts with us, the King of Magecraft might catch all of us in one fell swoop, right? Ritsuka raised her hand to speak, understanding the intention behind Shiomi's plan. Exactly, Shiomi nodded with a smile. But what I mentioned was only the worst-case scenario. What I actually want is to take this chance to confirm something. Gray asked, puzzled, what is it? When the King of Magecraft appeared in a London singularity, he said he was using his spare time to wait there. Shiomi carefully chose his words as he recalled every detail of that encounter. Back in Singularity F, Professor Love said the entire world had already been incinerated, and only Chaldea was spared thanks to its unique magnetic field. He looked around at everyone in the conference room. So, in reverse, could we speculate that the disaster of human incineration has already been completed? That the King of Magecraft has moved on to the next phase of his plan, and that his appearance before me was just a brief window before continuing his agenda? Then that means... Cold sweat formed on Olga Marie's brow. To the King of Magecraft, the incineration of humanity might have just been the first step. He shows an intense contempt for humanity and its history. He sees humans who cannot overcome death, or their fear of it, as utterly worthless, Shiomi explained. He had been pondering this for days, discussing it with Morgan, Romani, and even Da Vinci. Aside from Morgan, who remained tight-lipped, the others had reached similar conclusions. If he really does have a next step, then it's unlikely he'll have the time to casually appear before us again, like he did in London. That's precisely why Shiomi intended to head to the next singularity alone. To act as bait, to test whether the King of Magecraft would reveal himself again. Right now, both outcomes seemed equally possible. So his theory did little to reassure Olga Marie, who still couldn't support the new plan. No matter what, splitting up like this is still extremely risky. Even if you're stronger than all of us put together, going solo means there'll always be blind spots, Olga Marie said, biting her fingertip. That's why I'll go with you to the fifth singularity. The others can rest during this time, and then head to the third singularity afterward. Hold on, Director. Sakura stood up, slamming her hands on the table, staring directly at Olga Marie. I've worked alongside Dad before. I've been by his side since I was little. If anyone's going with him, it should be me. Olga Marie was caught off guard. She looked toward Karin. Then maybe Karin could go too? Karin responded with an odd smile. Who goes doesn't matter to me. Feel free to discuss it however you like. If it's really that inconvenient, I'll go, Gray offered, raising her hand. Like Mr. Shiomi, I'm a human with a noble phantasm. Ad's performance in the second singularity was outstanding. More than that, after Ad's release, the Holy Spear, through Gray's efforts, had defeated Attila the Hun, who had unleashed his own noble phantasm, bringing the final battle of the second singularity to a close. That won't do. Gray and Mash are both crucial, servant-level combatants. You two need to stay together. Olga Marie immediately rejected the suggestion. The third singularity is located in the Atlantis. Chaldea shows its Okinos. A place that exists only in legends. Ugh. Gray lowered her head, her entire face retreating into the shadows. Shiomi rubbed his temples. He really wanted to scold them for acting so childish. Restoring humanity wasn't a school field trip. But this kind of arguing wasn't so bad. At least it showed that no one had lost their spirit or determination in the face of the world's crisis. He stood up from his seat. There's still plenty of time before we move on to the fifth singularity. In the meantime, everyone should focus on resting and preparing. Da Vinci seems to have made some upgrades to the Chaldean Master's mystic code. It needs testing as well, Shiomi said, turning to Ritsuka. Also, considering how complicated future restoration work will be, there's something I'd like you to think about. What is it? Ritsuka asked seriously. Whether you'd be willing to take formal Magus training. It can't be comfortable always working as an amateur, right? Chapter 250, the Magus course Shiomi mentioned was actually very basic. Chaldea didn't have the luxury of time to conduct full-scale training. The Magus course Shiomi mentioned was actually very basic. Chaldea didn't have the luxury of time to conduct full-scale training. According to projections from the near-future observation lens, Sheba, Chaldea had about a year left. It sounded like plenty, but after each singularity, the accumulated fatigue and injuries from days of combat and marching took a long time to recover from. On top of that, with all outside communication cut off, Chaldea had to rely entirely on its internal systems to produce and manage supplies. Without that, they couldn't guarantee the survival of those who remained.